Hello, this is Greg Allison with Green Greg's coming to you today on the 16th of September. Today we have Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. Dr. Pry, as you may recall, has been on my channel here in the past. He is one of the nation's foremost experts in electromagnetic pulse and Soviet weaponry in general. He is a weapons systems expert. Dr. Pry has been the executive director of the National Task Force on Homeland Security. He was chief of staff of the Congressional EMP Committee. He's also been a professional on the House Armed Services Committee, professional staff. And he served a decade in the CIA from 1985 to 1995. One of the most active periods in which the Soviet Union was at their height. So he brings to us a wealth of experience. He has spoken at 2 of my power grid defense conferences. And today we are facing a very interesting threat with the growth of China, with potentials for asymmetric warfare. And today I have the strongest inclination that we're far more unprepared than people think we are. Let me base this on the following. Some of you know that in my profession, I build rockets. I've been doing that for decades. I also have worked on the space station and other things like that. But my experience was originally NASA in particular. I'm a contractor there, and I don't speak for them. I only speak for Greg Allison in this video. But it's been my experience that a lot of the expertise in the rocket building had died off and retired out for a while. And I wasn't getting the kind of hands-on experience I wanted. So I started building my own rockets. And we flew into space on stuff we developed out of garages in Huntsville, Alabama, which also gives me a unique perspective into what small groups could do in weapon systems development and deployment. It's really astounding when you think that hours were operating out of a garage and launching balloons to 20 miles high and launching rockets from them in the Gulf of Mexico from ships on a shoestring budget. So that plays into where we're going here. But it also tells me something else. It gave me expertise. And expertise I wasn't getting at work, expertise I didn't get at school, expertise that said, hey, if you're not out there doing things, you're not learning. That what you learn in the textbooks, what you learn in academia, what you go through in the programmatic programs that aren't actually actively building hardware is miles apart from when you're actually building things. You're not really learning. You're working on theory, and theory is useless. Let me just put it point blank. Theory without practical applications is garbage. You've got to actually be building things and making things to know how things really and truly work. That's the real expertise. And you're not going to get it from a book. You're not going to get it from watching a video or hearing someone else. You get it from doing it. And today, in our weapon systems development task forces, the engineers that we have today in our programs, they're not the engineers with experience developing our weapons. Those guys have retired and died out. So, Dr. Paul, where do you think we stand on this? What's our level of preparedness today in this country? And tell us why it matters.
Well, here where I have my greatest expertise, which is in nuclear weapons, I'd say we're probably at least a quarter century, 25 years behind Russia and China in developing new generation nuclear weapons of advanced design. And I say that because this year, the Department of State finally came clean and admitted that that China and Russia have been violating the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty for 25 years. The United States, for over 25 years, we've been complying with this treaty, which was never ratified by the Senate, but it has been the policy of the United States to observe the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, where we would not test nuclear weapons at all. But we now know that the Russians and the Chinese have been testing them at very low yields, which is enough to develop the new generation nuclear weapons, which are not mainly about creating blast and shock. That was the old generation nuclear weapons from the Cold War. The new generation nuclear weapons are tuned for particular nuclear effects, like electromagnetic pulse or neutron radiation, or clean, really small battlefield weapons that do create blast and shock, but at very low yields, so that you can use them just like a very powerful conventional weapon to take out a bridge or an armored division or something of that sort. Weapons that are so small that they can be put on an air-to-air missile, so that suddenly our fighters would face nuclear-armed adversary fighter aircraft in the skies. So that's the kind of thing that we're really behind on, because unlike us, at least Russia and China, we also know, of course, North Korea has been testing and developing weapons, and they've been getting help from Russia and China. That's why they've been able to advance their missile and nuclear program at just an astonishing pace, so that in the summer of 2017, for example, they tested a hydrogen bomb. And they know about EMP weapons and super EMP weapons. On the very day they tested that hydrogen bomb, they described it as one of the things it's capable of doing is making strategic super electromagnetic pulse attack. And they released a technical report, the North Koreans, which accurately describes basically super EMP nuclear weapons. So we're even behind the North Koreans. We don't have any super EMP weapons in our arsenal. This is a technology that has been perfected after the Cold War. All of the nuclear weapons in our current inventory are based on designs that are 30 years old or 40 years old or older than that. And it's not just the designs, but the actual weapons that were built 30 or 40 years ago or longer. And so we have not even built new nuclear weapons based on the old designs. They're the same old nuclear weapons. And they were never designed to last this long. They were never designed to last 30, 40, 50 years. They were designed usually to last about a decade. And because during the Cold War we were arms racing with the Russians, we figured that a new generation of nuclear weapons would be developed to replace those. But when the Cold War ended, we basically froze our nuclear deterrent in time and have been patching up and trying to maintain those old-fashioned nuclear weapons, which even if they work, they're not designed for the current strategic environment. One of the principles we tried to follow in the Cold War, which did work, we managed to win the Cold War by following this principle, which was to never allow your adversary to gain any advantage in the nuclear balance, in tactical nuclear weapons or strategic weapons, in the numbers of those weapons, or in the technological quality of those weapons, any real or perceived significant advantage. And we haven't been following that policy since the end of the Cold War. We actually worked a strategic miracle during the Cold War by following that policy, because it's the first time in history that you've had two superpowers facing off against each other, where one side has achieved victory without a major war. We managed to win the Cold War without it becoming a nuclear World War III, which is really a miracle when you look at what has usually happened historically when superpowers face off against each other.
Well, that brings up a lot of things. One, of course, is that we're actually not testing these weapons and haven't for some time. All the tests now are computer simulation. So we're not doing what we used to do. So in reality, we don't know that anything in our fleet, one, is something that we should be using, and two, that it will even work. So we don't know what we have, and our adversaries may probably suspect that. If I was an adversary, I'd go, I think the United States is a paper tiger in this area. So if we hit them, their ability to hit back is going to be very questionable, especially if we lead in with this EMP super weapon and fry their command and control, since the nuclear forces can't launch without a launch authorization.
Yes, that's correct. Some of the best nuclear weapon designers who are still alive, like Dr. John Foster, who designed most of the nuclear weapons in our current inventory, but who is now retired, and used to be a director of Lawrence Livermore, and Lowell Wood, another one of our great nuclear weapons experts, who also is still alive but also retired and no longer active. Both of them have warned that we can't be confident that those nuclear weapons will be safe and reliable and actually work in a crisis, because we have not tested them so long. And even the There was an excellent article written, it was either last year or a year before that, by the scientists, two of the scientists who were in charge of what's called the Science-Based Stockpile Stewardship Program. That's what our nuclear weapons labs call the computer basis, the basis for certifying every year that our nuclear weapons are safe and reliable without testing. It's called the Science-Based Stockpile Stewardship Program. And the two leading scientists at Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore co-authored an article in a scientific journal warning that, look, we've been heading up the Science-Based Stockpile Stewardship Program. Now we're going into retirement, but we have to tell you, we can't certify it. As time goes on, we can't certify that these weapons will be safe and reliable and actually work. It was never intended, it was a political decision made by the Clinton administration to stop nuclear testing and to sign on to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And the nuclear weapon labs never promised that they could forever, without any nuclear testing at all, maintain the safety and reliability of the nuclear weapons based on science-based stockpile stewardship, which, as you note, it's based on computer models, and it's based on basically eyeballing, inspecting the weapons, and looking for, well, is there corrosion here? Does this part need to be replaced? It's very much akin, and you don't need to be a nuclear physicist to understand why this is an extremely dangerous, and I would say even irresponsible, policy for your nuclear weapons. Think about it this way. Suppose you had a Boeing 747, all right, and you decided that you weren't going to fly the plane for 25 years. And the guys who designed the plane are all in retirement or dead. But you've brought in these whiz kids, kids who have graduated from college, and they're good with computer programs. And they have tried to build a model of how the Boeing 747 works. And they're allowed to eyeball the parts, all the parts. You can look at all the parts, but you can never start the engines. And so let it sit there for 25 years. And then after 25 years, you want to use the plane, and you fill up the plane with passengers. Who would want to be on that airplane? Okay, nobody would. It'd be insane to take a chance like that. But that's basically exactly what we're doing with our nuclear deterrent.
In our organization that I work in, as a contractor at NASA, which is avionics system safety right now, we have a little saying that we like to kick around, and it's that, language here is a little colorful, but this is what we say: models are no damn good. Sometimes they're useful. That's how we view models. Models are no damn good. Sometimes they're useful. That's the best thing we can expect out of them. I've seen failures in models so much. It's garbage in, garbage out. You have to make assumptions to make a model, and those assumptions are what you think reality is, or how well you think you can match it. Look, I used to integrate years before software and hardware together, and I was developing test program sets to test how things would fail. And I'm going to tell you what, the theory and what you'd find when you actually run it were miles apart. You spent most of your time correcting and bringing these things back together to make your software run in that hardware. And so and it goes back to what I was talking about with building rockets also, which I've done plenty of, that, if you don't have the hands-on expertise, you've got nothing. You're nowhere. You're nobody. You are zero zip. It's garbage. And that's where we're at today with our knowledge base. Now, for the watcher, they're going to ask me, Greg, why does this matter? If we have, and I'm going to have comments, if we have a nuclear war, they're going to say it's all over. We can't win. Everyone's gone. And what you don't realize, I was in the military myself. And in the military, they train you and teach you how to survive and operate in a nuclear war. And we had lessons on how to maneuver, what to do to get across a radiation field, put sandbags in the bottom of the Jeep or the vehicles, and things that we would do to try. Yeah, you'd be taking some radiation, but you were meant to operate. And we trained that way when I was in the military. Now, I got out of the military active duty in 1983, and I went in the Guard a couple of years after that. But I have been to the schools that teach that stuff. In fact, I was the honor graduate in the nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare school that I attended. So I'm familiar with these things. I know how, we were trained how to estimate the yield of a nuclear device, how to estimate the fallout patterns, how to maneuver around it. That's what we trained to. And from my knowledge and expertise, yeah, it would be a very, very ugly situation, but the militaries can still operate, or at least could back in that day. So what do you say to those that are worried that this isn't going to happen just simply because we couldn't survive it? What's your response to that?
Well, it could have happened many times during the Cold War.
Yeah.
Even trying as best as we could. I've actually written a book about this called War Scare, Russia and America on the Nuclear Brink, that talks about not all of the close calls we had during the Cold War and afterwards, but a few of them. But there were many times when Russia, the Soviet Union, America, and then even Russia and the United States came very close to going to a nuclear war, despite our best efforts to maintain a strong nuclear deterrent. And one of the points that your audience should keep in mind is the most important mission of the nuclear deterrent is to ensure that nuclear war doesn't happen in the first place. And the way you ensure that, going back to a very important point you made before, is by managing the perceptions of your adversary. We are building our nuclear deterrence job is not to deter Nancy Pelosi or the Democrat left that is in. Okay? Our nuclear deterrent has to deter Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi in China, guys who believe in fighting and winning nuclear wars, all right? So our deterrent has got to be as good and as scary as their nuclear capabilities. Otherwise, you run the risk of them seeing us as weak and unprepared, and that they would be able to win a nuclear war against us. Nothing is more certain to result in a nuclear conflict than weakness. So that's point one. Point two is not only are you seeking to deter a nuclear war, but you're seeking to avoid losing World War III without there being a war, because that's one of the other things we learned from the Cold War, that you can achieve enormously important geostrategic goals without war through the intimidating effect of nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union, all during the Cold War, had a 5-to-1 tank advantage, a 7-to-1 advantage in artillery, something like a 4-to-1 advantage in fighter aircraft over NATO. If there were no nuclear weapons, they could have rolled over NATO, in a couple of weeks. Okay, our nuclear deterrent kept the peace and prevented them from doing that. All right, and not only that, but it kept the peace so long that even when the Soviet Union was in its death throes, that evil empire, and it was the evilest empire that ever existed in history, perhaps until today, went away, and we achieved basically a bloodless victory without having to fire a single nuclear weapon. So nuclear weapons can enable you to win a World War III without actually having to fight it, which is, and I fear, looking at what's happening around the world now, that we are actually losing the World War III. The bad guys have learned the lessons of their defeat in the Cold War, and there are signs and things that are happening. For example, the Russian invasion of Crimea, even though the United States and Britain had guaranteed the territorial integrity of Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons, it was called the Bucharest Agreement, all right? Look at Ukraine. Not only has Russia seized a hunk of Crimea and violated that security guarantee to Ukraine, and we haven't done anything about it, but they've actually had this long crucifixion of Ukraine going on, which is a deliberate policy by Russia to keep this long gray war going on in Ukraine, because what they're doing is they're messaging to all of our NATO allies, see what we can do to this country whose national security was guaranteed and territorial integrity was guaranteed. Every day that the Ukraine conflict goes on, it diminishes the confidence of allies in the security guarantees of the United States. That's one example. Another example is the recent.
We've not been able to count the Russians anywhere they rolled their conventional forces, but Yugoslavia, Eastern Ukraine, have taken that too through proxy. And, when they rolled into, the Mideast, around Georgia, when they rolled into many cases Syria, and then they go toe to toe with us. They don't shy away from going toe to toe. We've had some scuffs with them with vehicles in Syria just recently, within the past few weeks. They don't mind going toe to toe with us at all in that kind of a environment. So
denuclearize Iran, and Russia has agreed to build 3 new nuclear reactors for Iran. Okay, and we don't say much about that, and that's because in the Pacific, you've got a great example with China, where China basically has got de facto control of the South China Sea, even though 3 years ago the International Court at The Hague ruled that they have no legal claim to the South China Sea. But nonetheless, they've militarized the South China Sea. They're building artificial islands. They've seized other islands, natural islands that don't belong to them, and have militarized them. And because they are a nuclear weapons state, all we have done to challenge that is we will send an aircraft carrier in there to show the flag on occasion. Okay, another thing that has happened that makes me fear we're losing World War III without a war, is the removal from Guam of the B-52 bomber wing we had there. For a decade, we had B-52s and tankers stationed in Guam. And they have all been pulled out and sent to Minot, North Dakota. Now, the Air Force has put a smiley face on that and said, well, this gives us greater flexibility. The real reason they did that is because they're within missile range of both North Korea and China. And so this is how you win World War III without war. Nuclear weapons are chess pieces. You have to think of it as a chess game. And, and what you're doing is you're affecting your adversary's calculations of risk. Is it worth the risk to keep that wing out there when it could be destroyed by a missile strike by North Korea or Iran? Don't remember in 2017, North Korea was threatening to strike Guam with missiles. And so a couple of years later, suddenly our bomber wing gets pulled out of there. I don't think that that's a coincidence.
That's very significant, because a lot of people don't realize we've won a lot of the wars we've won recently and fought by being able to stage ourselves around the adversary. That's how we took Iraq so easily. We flew all these sorties right in to the combat zone, just sortie after sortie. How do you do that when you've had to pull back so far? With a 9-dash line and other things that China's done, they have expanded their sphere with these theater-based ballistic missiles, the short-range ballistic missiles, which we gave up and traded with the Russians. They're able to reach out and touch things that causes us to have to pull back. They got their I believe 21 DF-26 missiles that they determined to be their aircraft killers. The aircraft carrier killers, the carrier killers. And these missiles are all capable of reaching Guam and many of our islands around there. So we have, as you mentioned, pulled back, but that says that we have to fight with a longer and longer arm, a longer and longer reach. It becomes harder and harder to prosecute a war should we need that. Now, if you're on the Chinese side of this, you might be seeing a strategy to win. And to you, that strategy might be, hey, look, United States now requires, even a lot of people say, we got submarines. If we get bombed, the submarines are going to surface and counterattack. They're not going to do it without that emergency authorization message. I forget exactly what it's called. I'm sure you can remind me.
EAM. Yeah, that's what it's called. The emergency action message. EAM.
Okay, that's it. The emergency action message. Yeah, I knew I had it close. But if you don't have that emergency action message today, you're not allowed to launch.
That's right.
So if they can take out with their EMP super weapons, which puts out 4 times more power than our mil-spec for hardening our systems, uh, then they may have the confidence that they can hit us. I mean, if they can, this would take out a lot of our surface systems. It would take out so much of our defense posture if they hit us with EMP super weapons that we would be almost defenseless in many regards. It would be tough, especially if our weapons that we would fight back with are uncertain. You know, we don't know what they would do. They may be getting more and more bold. They want to take Taiwan, but they realize they got to deal with us if they do. So I would imagine if they wanted to take Taiwan, they would do. They would hit uh, Taiwan with an EMP. So Taiwan's got a lot of missiles. The biggest fear China's got in attacking Taiwan is that Taiwan will launch all their missiles in the mainland and obliterate a whole lot of mainland China. But I would assume that any of those missiles that are precision guided would be taken out by an EMP super weapon. And if they would EMP attack our carriers like they've talked about doing already, they've already publicly stated if we're not careful in the South China Sea, the operations where we're going through and flying the flag, that they might just EMP our carrier groups. You don't say something to that?
They said that in March 20, just this March 2020, and we've basically been challenging them on that. Fortunately, so far they haven't EMP'd our carrier groups, but they made that public threat just this year in March 2020. Now, many of your listeners or viewers may be like my wife and saying, well, maybe this is a good thing because we're sick and tired of the United States being a global policeman, and we want to pull back into an isolationist posture and just protect America, Fortress America. And so if we disengage from the world and pull all of our troops back and leave these other allies who haven't been all that great in terms of providing for their own security on their own, we'll be left alone and we'll be safer. And I would caution that even if we did that, and I have some sympathy for that point of view, to be honest. You know, the post-Cold War balance of power, where the United States had half the world's, gross domestic product, is no longer the situation. The huge leads we used to have in technology, both in nuclear and conventional weapons technology, has shrunk. In fact, we don't have a lead when it comes to nuclear weapons technology, and even in many areas of conventional weapons technology, we don't have a lead. And I also am afraid that, our bureaucracy, our military bureaucracy, it lacks strategic imagination, especially during times of peace, protracted periods of peace. The military bureaucrats, we lose the battle experienced generals, who learned from the actual history of doing war, all right? And it's been a long time since World War II, the last big one. And we've had, generations of bureaucratic generals now who cling to certain fantasies. For example, the idea of the aircraft carrier as being, the forever invulnerable, and it's going to be the way of projecting power for us in the future. Yet you already mentioned the Chinese technology. We don't even have a counterpart to it, which is these anti-aircraft carrier missiles, that can home in and destroy an aircraft carrier, or the ballistic missile submarines. Not only do we have to worry about the submarines being cut off from communication so that they can't get emergency action messages, and that's absolutely true. The EMP would take out the communications apparatus that we need to communicate with those submarines to pass launch orders. But the submarines themselves may be vulnerable. The U.S. Navy today it continues to, and I think it was in one of the policy papers that was put out by the Pentagon that U.S. submarines remain invulnerable, and they don't foresee a technology that could make those submarines vulnerable. And that's an astonishingly arrogant point of view, it seems to me, to make. Since, we know, I was just reading a book, when you talk to the other part of the Pentagon about how successful our anti-submarine warfare capabilities are against Soviet-era subs during the Cold War. I was just reading a book about that, about how, we had the SOSUS system, for example, during the Cold War, that was so good that we could actually identify where Soviet ballistic missile and attack submarines were located so we could go out and destroy them. Well, why do we assume that a technology that would have been so successful for us against enemy submarines during the Cold War could not be duplicated, maybe even improved by Russia and China, so that they could do the same thing to our submarines in the event of a future war? There are amazing technological advances happening now, and if you are not willing to think objectively about, well, how could I harness some of these new technologies the way the Navy seems to want to put blinders on and not think about anti-submarine warfare, we could be really setting ourselves up for a surprise. An example is this LIDAR, for example, the technology that so far, and it hasn't even been produced by the U.S. government. I think it was the University of Houston cooperated with some private sector company to come up with this amazing new technology that can see through the forests in Guatemala and central Mexico, and it has revolutionized our understanding of Mayan civilization. We can see tenfold more cities beneath. So basically, this capability has been able to one would think it would have been technologically impossible, but we can actually see through the dense canopy of the rainforests now and identify exactly, where these ruins are located. And now this wasn't the result of an all-out effort by a nation state, okay? This was the University of Houston cooperating with some private sector mid-level company, and they came up with this amazing technology. What might China and Russia have been able to do in the way of anti-submarine warfare, harnessing technologies like this, revolutionary new technologies, when they know it's so important for them to be able to neutralize the ballistic missile leg of our nuclear triad? That's the last thing. That's the one thing they weren't able to do during the Cold War. Okay, so they were able to take out our bombers. If they wanted to launch a surprise attack during the Cold War, they would have been able to take out our bombers. They would have been able to take out our ICBMs. But the last thing was the ballistic missile submarines.
Right.
And made it much easier for them now, because during the Cold War, we had 40 ballistic missile submarines. That fleet has now shrunk to 14 ballistic missile submarines. And on a day-to-day basis, we don't maintain them all at sea. We can't. Only a third of them are at sea. So our national security depends upon the survival, basically of about 5 or 6, no less than that, 4 to 5 ballistic missile submarines, the Ohio-class submarines. That number is going to go down to 12.
And they're old. They're old now. They want to replace the Ohio class.
Yeah, the Ohio class is going to go away because they're going to be obsolete in 10 years, and they're at the end of their life, and we're going to replace them with the Columbias. And we only have planned to build 12 Columbias. So that number will go down to 4. So all they've got to do is find, now as Greg said, they might not even have to destroy the things physically, but the Russians and Chinese, as conservative military planners, they would love to be able to not only cut these guys off from the emergency action messages, but to destroy the submarines themselves. And guess what the Russians are deploying? Next year, they're going to start deploying their Poseidon robot unmanned submarine, this mysterious torpedo. They're planning to deploy 32 of them.
32 of them?
Yeah, 32 of them.
Jeez, that's just, for those that don't know what we're talking about, that's the scariest weapon that's ever been devised, in my opinion, because these are like UAV they're called torpedoes. They're like a submarine. They can cross the entire ocean. They can sit on the bottom of the ocean unmonitored. But the worst thing about them is they carry the Sarbama. The Sarbama is a 100 megaton bomb. They tested a half-scale version of it, and the power was off the chart, scary, unbelievable. It is believed that one of these detonated off the east coast of the United States would set up a tsunami 1,500 feet high. Think about what happened in Fukushima with a 30-foot high tsunami. This would take out the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. Three of them would take out, three of them is all you would need to take out all the ports that we have in America. Am I right or wrong on that?
No, that's correct. And that's what the Russians have advertised its purpose as being, to send a 300-foot high radioactive tidal wave against the east and west coasts of the United States, render them inhabitable, and also destroy.
That's what trails off. Yeah, it would trail off to about 300 feet. But that's an enormous tidal wave, and it would sweep inland for miles and miles. It would take out most of the people in the United States, because most of our people live in coastal cities. Right. If you live anywhere under 300 feet elevation, you are at risk of not existing when this would happen. Three of them all. How many did you say that are playing in the field? Did you say
deploy 32, which is, and I would add that 100 megaton warhead, that's equivalent to 10,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. 100 megaton warhead, to give the audience an idea. This is the most powerful nuclear weapon ever deployed. The United States has no counterpart to this, and it's deterrent. But that number is very interesting to me, because I suspect the real purpose of the Poseidon is not to raise these tidal waves. They could use it for that, but they have the ability, if they wanted to destroy cities, they can do that with their normal nuclear weapons and all the rest. I think that what these things are intended to do is to sit on the bottom outside of our ballistic missile submarine ports and trail those submarines that we deploy. So because a 100 megaton weapon will generate an underwater shock wave that reaches out for more than 100 kilometers. So they don't even have to get close to one of our submarines. If they can get within 100 kilometers of those ballistic missile subs, not only can they take out the emergency action message, but they'll be able to destroy the sub itself. And
well, not only that, but also our aircraft carrier groups, entire carrier groups can be taken out with one single device.
That's right.
Our group. And how many of them do we keep at sea?
On a day-to-day basis, we keep about four to five Ohios. That's going to go down to 4 when we go down to the Columbia class submarine. But in a
what about the aircraft carrier groups? We don't keep meeting about 4 or 5 of them. Is about all we keep.
I was talking about the ballistic missile submarines. Right? Yeah. But the
topics on you. My bad. I apologize for that.
But in a scenario, what's called a generated scenario. Okay. We could put all 12 Columbias to sea. Okay. And likewise, our allies, Britain and France, could put their submarines, to sea. So, so that would be, so Britain has 4, France has 4 ballistic missile submarines. 32 Poseidons happens to add up to enough Poseidons to have 2 Poseidons assigned to each of our Columbia-class submarines, and 1 Poseidon assigned to each of the British and French submarines. So it's just a very interesting number that they plan to deploy 32. I think that that's what the real purpose of the Poseidon is, to basically knock the props out of that last leg of the triad that kept us alive during the Cold War, so that they would be able to take out our bombers in a surprise attack, take out the ICBMs, and take out the ballistic missile submarines. And I need to say something else, though, too, because I'm sure people are still shaking their heads and saying, oh, that'll never happen in nuclear war. We've been so brainwashed into thinking that a all-out nuclear war means the end of the world, all right? We've brainwashed our own people into thinking that. But it's not true, especially when you're talking about new generation nuclear weapons. Even using the kind of weapons that we had during the Cold War, when Jim Schlesinger was the Secretary of Defense, I have this information in one of the articles I published, but it's also available online now. It used to be secret. But Schlesinger had done a briefing for the president and for Congress, where he demonstrated that even using those old-fashioned kind of nuclear weapons that had high yields and that were designed for blast and shock, that a Soviet first strike that took out our bombers, took out our ballistic missile submarine bases, and took out our ICBMs, would kill, something like 1 to 2. You can do it in ways that it would take out about 2 to 3% of the national population. Now that's millions of people, okay? So that's surely terrible, but that means that 98 to 97% of the population is left alive. And the idea was, and Schlesinger was one of the first that introduced this strategic concept, of the difference between a counter force versus a counter value attack. The counter force attack is just where you go after the forces. You're trying to disarm the guy so that he can't retaliate. And you're deliberately keeping the cities alive. You're not attacking the cities because you want to deter him from retaliating, especially against your own cities. You're basically leaving those cities alive so that you can, if he retaliates against your cities, or retaliates maybe against your forces, you can start doing counter value attacks. Maybe take out one city to say, hey, if you keep shooting nukes at us, we will not refrain from attacking your population. Now we'll start taking out your population centers one at a time. And if you make a mass retaliation against us, we're going to take your population out. Now that was during the Cold War. So when we were talking about old generation nuclear weapons, the new generation nuclear weapons, things like hypersonic weapons.
We should put that in perspective. You got to realize Japan surrendered on the takeout of 2 cities.
Yes.
They did an unconditional surrender upon the loss of 2 cities.
Right. I think the West is so brainwashed itself and is so terrorized of the possibility of nuclear war. I could easily see Angela Merkel and the leaders of NATO Europe immediately surrendering in response to just one EMP attack. One EMP attack because they will have crossed that nuclear threshold. Even though it won't have destroyed a city immediately, it will black out the European NATO grid, and I think that these guys would rather give Russia whatever it wants in geopolitical terms, rather than escalate to a nuclear conflict. It would take a very strong, bold American president to be able to lead NATO Europe and continue a war that involved a nuclear exchange. But to get to the point that I'm trying to make, when you look at the new generation nuclear weapons that they have, these hypersonic delivery vehicles, for example, the hypersonic reentry vehicles, these are maneuverable warheads. They maneuver through the atmosphere not just to be able to avoid our ballistic missile defenses, but they're in effect what's called a MARV. This is a maneuverable reentry vehicle. So they can achieve cruise missile type accuracies when they attack missile silos and bomber bases. The more accurate your delivery vehicle is, the lower the yield is that is required to destroy a target, to destroy a hard target. Right. The accuracies of a MARV are so great, you'll be able to strike within 10 yards of a missile silo. With a 1 kiloton weapon, you could take out a missile silo with a weapon like that. And if the accuracies are like what we had on the Pershing II, the Pershing II fired a small MARV with a very low yield warhead. If they achieved with their current 2020 technology what we achieved in the 1980s with the Pershing II MARV, you wouldn't even need a nuclear weapon on the delivery vehicle, because you could strike the silo right on the lid, and the kinetic energy just from that impact would destroy the missile silo. So we're not talking about, when we're talking about Russia or China making a nuclear attack against us, or even North Korea because of EMP, this isn't your grandfather's nuclear war where we're talking about huge mushroom clouds over cities or even over air bases. We're talking about nuclear weapons that are very low yield, highly accurate, or that have specialized effects so that they could keep the collateral damage to the population very, very low, so that you wouldn't be losing practically anybody except the people who are actually manning the silos or actually present on the air bases. You could actually prosecute a nuclear war where the casualties might be 10,000 people or something like that. In response to something, a disarming strike, it wouldn't make any sense for us to blow up Moscow. And the bad guys know this. The bad guys know this. So when we're talking about a nuclear war using modern technologies, It's not necessarily an end of the world scenario. However, I also have to add this because Russia and China both believe in a principle called escalation dominance. They want to have weapons that are so powerful that they overwhelm and overawe us at every level. So on one end of the technology spectrum, you have, you can have hypersonic, maneuverable weapons armed with extremely low yield warheads that can do a surgical nuclear war. But then on the other hand, they've got things like Poseidon, a 100 megaton warhead that can throw a 300-meter high radioactive, and that is an end of the world scenario. So they're not excluding.
Yeah, I misheard you earlier.
For the whole spectrum of nuclear wars, and the ultimate objective of all this is to win without war, but because the idea of escalation dominance is, again, going back to that chess game, that when an American president and the Pentagon, gets in some kind of a dust-up or crisis with Russia or China, and we have to think about, well, what are the risks and benefits of us to engage in them in a conflict? Dare we do it? We will always arrive at the conclusion, well, it just isn't worth the candle. And so we're going to back off. And that's what we have been doing, sending an aircraft carrier in to show a flag when China basically now owns the South China Sea. That's not a victory for us. That's really a defeat. I mean, Adolf Hitler would be perfectly happy, with a situation like that, where he had de facto control over the South China Sea. And so what if the Allies want to show the flag every now and again to convince themselves that they're not losing? He'd be perfectly happy to let us go on with that kind of a delusion while he grabs territory someplace.
Adolf Hitler would have been thrilled to have had a fraction of the power that China has.
Yes.
He lost because he didn't have the manufacturing base. We won World War II as a war of attrition because we outproduced Germany. That's how we won the war with Germany. Now, we won against Japan because we dropped 2 nukes and took out 2 of their cities. But now, so if you look at the situation in China, it has vast manufacturing capacity, way beyond ours. How do we win a war of attrition out of a country that can produce more than us? And of course, here's the great deception. And you talked about, the theory of escalation of dominance. And a lot of people say, well, China's only, now I'm seeing lately, I'm even saying China's only got 200 nukes. China's only got 300 nukes. So I've heard 300 for decades. I just saw a paper which claims, well, they got 200, and or an article at least. So, I think that's a fallacy. But what we do know is they're posturing themselves to be able to double or better the number they do have in inventory. But when you look at in the desert, they have all these underground tunnels. We know they have mobile missile launchers that can launch ICBMs. And I have the sneaking suspicion that those tunnels are vast networks that are carrying probably 2,000 or 3,000, maybe up that many devices on mobile launchers in those tunnels. So if we had something like that, and I know it was an option for the MX missile for Carter to have a rail-based underground MX, and he nixed that idea, which is probably the worst idea ever. If we had those today, and they wouldn't be easy to take out. If they took out our submarine fleet, a first strike on our missiles wouldn't be able to find them. I think that's where China is today. I think they actually have ground-based ICBMs with missiles that they're rolling through these tunnels that we can't find, that they would be able to strike us with. I think, we should have developed something like that, and they have it today there. So I think that, given the submarines are putting out there, the aircraft are putting out there, their short-range ballistic missiles, the short-range ballistic missiles, unlike the ICBMs, which includes the aircraft killers, the Guam killers as they call them, the DF-21, DF-26 missiles, that they must have a vast quantity of new. When we haven't done anything to verify what they have other than listen to their claims, and that their claims for the same number for decades seems a little suspicious to me. What do you think about that?
Well, first, I agree with what you've said completely. the number 200 that you cited, well, first of all, those tunnels that you're talking about, that's called the Chinese call, that's the underground Great Wall, has been called that.
Yeah.
And it belongs, all those tunnels, I think there's something like 5,000 kilometers of tunnels. It all belongs to to China's equivalent of their strategic rocket forces. So their nuclear, the nuclearized part of their military owns, these 5,000 kilometers of underground tunnels. I think it is fantastically naive of us to assume that is not a hidden nuclear force in there.
Well, our arms control people in the State Department just seem to automatically assume whatever China tells us.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, it's actually a feedback loop, because China, if you go back to the history of the estimates of how many nukes does China have, they've never told us anything. We have basically, our arms control community and our intelligence community, we've made guesses about how many nukes they have, all right? And the number has been consistently over the years about 300 strategic nukes that can reach the United States. But recently, and this is the schizophrenic nature, and it's because I think our intelligence community has been corrupted by the left, over so many years. Too many. We've got all multiple generations of kids that have been, educated in our wonderful university system, and these are the ones that are doing our estimates now. Okay, but
now, show me one that can build a rocket.
we've always had a problem when it comes to China, getting good intelligence on China, because most of our China experts are what are called panda huggers. Okay, the reason people have gone into Chinese studies is because they learned Mandarin, is because they admired Chinese history. They were interested in Chinese culture. They didn't start off because they wanted to find out how many nuclear weapons China has. They wanted to learn Mandarin and go to China and admire the culture of China. And there is a lot to admire there. Oh, yeah. But these people, who have that kind of a background, it's kind of dangerous to your national security to entrust them as the people who are going to ultimately tell you about the China threat, because the panda huggers are those same ones who have told us that, well, China could be a natural friend, and they were an ally during the Cold War, but it's on advice like that we let China into the World Trade Organization, and we gave them all these economic advantages that President Trump is finally the first president that's come along and said, these guys are eating our lunch. They're actually waging economic warfare against us. We've only woken up to this, but there's a reason we followed those wrong-headed policies, and that's because people in our intelligence community and in our foreign policy establishment we're basically panda huggers. And these same people, they never wanted to see, any serious threat from China, precisely because they were afraid of somebody like President Trump coming along, and they wanted to believe in their fantasy, okay, that China and the United States can be great friends, and we can and by that we can turn China into a capitalist nation, and as free markets go, so go free political institutions, and that eventually we can win the Cold War peacefully against China the way we did against the Soviet Union, except that's a myth. I mean, we didn't win the Cold War against the Soviet Union by giving them all these benefits. We won it by arming to the teeth so that the Soviet Union wasn't able to commit World War III, and then they fell of their internal contradictions because they couldn't compete with us economically. And that's the policy that we should have been following toward China, but we've been following a policy that's based on a rosy-colored view of the China threat. And part of this is a real dangerous thing when you've got a intelligence community that underestimates, especially nuclear threats. That number 200, you can see a schizophrenic character in the Pentagon and the attitudes toward China. Because on the one hand, the Pentagon is with the president and has been warning about how China represents a growing threat to us, and how they're going to double their nuclear arsenal over the next 10 years, okay? But then in that same report, they gave the number of Chinese strategic weapons as just 200. That's actually 100 less than what the arms control community and the panda huggers have been saying for decades.
Exactly.
For decades, it was supposed to be 300. And now in the same report where we're supposed to be worried about China, it goes down to 200. I don't understand that, except that you've got a real big panda hugger in there in the China office of our own intelligence community that's putting out bad numbers. Now, the Russians, who are actually much closer to China than we are, the Russians and China and China are strategic partners by treaty, and they actually cooperate in their military exercises. But the Russians themselves have estimated that the Chinese arsenal, tactical nuclear weapons, as well as strategic weapons, could be as high as 3,000 weapons, which is twice as many as the United States has.
They would trust their ally Russia a lot more than their panda hugger analyst that's here in the States. And something else a lot of people here in the United States don't recognize and appreciate is how reports are generated in organizations. Now, I've lived my life working in organizations and making reports, and the guys on the bottom with the knowledge write it as it is. The problem is these reports got to filter up through management before they get signed off and released. And what that equals and what that means is it gets watered down, often extremely significantly watered down, where you had some really big thing to announce here. By the time it gets up to the top management gets released, it's like, oh, no problem, everything's roses. The guy at the lower level who wrote it says, oh my God, we're about to get hit in the head. The guy at the top says, oh no, it's all beautiful, and smiles and puts a smiley face on it and puts it out. That's the way reports get generated and sent out. The management always waters these things down and puts the spin on them that is in accordance with whatever the management structure wants to go out at that time, which is, as I said, often a departure from what the original writers had in mind. Even if they're panda huggers, it gets watered down even more. What do you say to that? You've lived your life in a long career
experience, and I think it's safe for me to say that that some of my best work at the CIA never got published and never saw the light of day because of this thing called the coordination process.
Yes,
which is what you're describing. That's what they call it. If it's not like it is in the movies where you'll have some brilliant analyst and everybody listens to that brilliant analyst, okay, and the brilliant analyst manages to save the day. We do have the intelligence community is just like any other organization. You've got a small number of really brilliant people. You've got most of them are mediocre people, mostly are mediocre minds, and then you've got a bunch of idiots. All right, and in the coordination process, everybody has got to agree. It's got to be a consensus view before you can publish a product, because it's a corporate product. It's not just Pete Fry being able to speak his mind to the president. It's the CIA speaking to the president. And so at the level of the analysts, even before it gets to your managers, you basically have to pretty much get a consensus. So that means the dumb people have to agree with the brilliant people. And they're not just going to, they have egos. They think they're brilliant too, these dumb people.
They usually think they're smarter.
Yeah, they usually think they're smarter. And so what you're really getting is the lowest common denominator. The intelligence reports are the lowest common denominator, and that's why they're so often wrong, and that's why our intelligence works. And then it gets percolated up through layers of management in that same process. So you're already starting off with a report that's been crippled, okay? And right. And that same process happens with each level of management. So you can just imagine how bad the product can be when it finally comes out.
I know. I've seen them over and over and over again through things I've worked on, and I see this in products coming out of other agencies that I look at and go, I know better than that. That's not right. But people are trusting this, and they're trusting it's equivalent to science. A lot of the so-called science that's out there today is going through the same process. So it's often thumb on the scale from the get-go because the scientists have a vested interest in a particular outcome because that's where they make their bacon. And by the time it gets filtered up through this coordination process you mentioned, what you get out is far removed from what I would expect to be science or an analysis, weapon systems analysis, safety analysis. It applies to all reports and all organizations.
Let me give you an example from history where this had grave consequences. All right, and in fact, it's worth watching. There's an old movie worth watching, but this is also true from history called The Trial of Billy Mitchell. All right, and Billy Mitchell had been this was before there was a U.S. Air Force, and so he was a colonel. He was a colonel in the U.S. Army Air Corps. All right, before World War II in the 1920s. And here's an example of a brilliant individual who foresaw the future. He had the vision to understand that naval aviation and aircraft carriers were going to be the decisive weapon in future wars. And that went against all of the common wisdom of the organizations in which he worked. They believed in the battleship theory, that in the future wars, it was going to be the battleships. And that's where all the money should go. It shouldn't be going into naval aviation. It shouldn't go into aircraft carriers. It should go into battleships and cruisers, and because that's how future wars are going to be fought. And Billy Mitchell understood. He was such a brilliant guy and had such vision that he actually predicted the invasion of the Japanese attack in Pearl Harbor in 1941, 20 years before it happened, and wrote a paper on that, and had the nerve, because he was so afraid for his country getting this wrong, that he openly challenged, the military. He challenged the Army and the Navy on this, and he was court-martialed. He was court-martialed for his views, but he turned out to be right. Okay, here's an example of one brilliant individual. And the reason he was able to see that, was because he was a brilliant individual. And it's not an uncommon thing today that there'll be people out there who have a vision and get things right, whereas our intelligence community, with all of its tens of thousands of analysts and all of its satellites and its billions of dollars, they get it wrong. And why is that? How could that possibly be? Well, it's precisely because of this phenomena that you described. This coordination process where the lowest common denominator prevails, just like it did against Billy Mitchell before World War II. And the only reason we ended up with any aircraft carriers during World War II is there was another brilliant individual who bucked the system. Oh, I'm trying to remember his name. I should remember his name. I apologize for it skipping. We have an aircraft carrier named after him today. He was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee.
Nimitz?
No, it wasn't Nimitz.
Chairman of the House Armed Services Committee?
He was a chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and he believed Billy Mitchell, listened to him, and he forced the Navy to build aircraft carriers. That's the only reason the Navy didn't want to build aircraft carriers. But this chairman compelled them to build at least a few carriers, and that's why we ended up with some aircraft carriers before World War II started. That's how bad our this system can be. So just because the intelligence community makes a claim or says something, people shouldn't assume that, oh, well, the intelligence community is the one to be believed. Brilliant individuals, visionary people can be right and often have been, while the intelligence community has been completely wrong. And to go back to that China estimate, there is a fact that you can look up for yourself that should give every person grave doubt about the Pentagon estimate, the intelligence community estimate, that China only has 200 strategic weapons. We know for a fact that China has got about 30, I think they're the DF-41 ICBMs. This is this new mobile ICBM, all right? This ICBM is armed with 10 to 12 multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles.
How many of these do they have again?
30. They've paraded 30 of them. All right. So how can they have only 200 strategic warheads when the DF-41, they've got 30 DF-41s that are supposed to have 10 warheads apiece, at least? That's 300 warheads right there. And that's not the only ICBM they have. So I find it very hard to reconcile that number with what we can actually see in terms of China's deployment of weapons. And here's another point, as long as we're on it, and we're talking about nuclear war and how to think about nuclear conflict. One of the other great delusions that comes out of the arms control establishment has been that, parity, that we don't have to worry. We've got so many, suppose they're right. Suppose China only has 200 or 300 warheads right now. Suppose they're right about that China only has 200 to 300 warheads. And we've got, 1,500 weapons. That's what we've got in our strategic inventory. So we're far ahead of China, so we don't have to worry about China, right? Because in order to worry about China, they should have more strategic warheads than we. But that's not true. That's an arms control fantasy that doesn't make any strategic sense when you actually think about it as a warfighter, all right?
No.
What the Chinese general staff is looking at is what can they do with their nuclear arsenal against our target set? In order to do a successful first strike against the United States, they need less than 500 weapons, not less than 500 weapons. 500 accurate strategic weapons can take out our 400 ICBMs. We've got 3 strategic bomber bases and 2 ballistic missile submarine bases. That's what you're after. It's less than 500 weapons. It's close to 400 weapons. All right. So as soon as they hit the magic number of 400 accurate weapons, we should be worried about a first strike from China, because they can cover all of our military targets and take them out with 400 accurate weapons, little over 400 accurate weapons. Now, just on the DF-41, they've got 30 of those. That's 300 weapons. If they deploy another 20 of them, that's 500 weapons. So China will enter the first strike capability as soon as they get 500 accurate weapons. I think they probably already have many times that. I think they actually have many times more warheads than we have, because they've been hiding them in that underground Great Wall.
Amen. That's what I think.
Panda huggers are right. Even if we assume the panda huggers are right about the numbers, we should still be worried about the Chinese inventory of increasingly sophisticated strategic weapons that can reach the United States.
Amen. Oh, by the way, when we got a little here, I want to tell people that if you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, bang the update notification bell, and click all, because I'll bring you a lot of good videos on this. This is a series of keeping your eyes wide open and head on a swivel, because there's so many things that can come at us. Peter, the proposition of my channel, I always tell my viewers, is help them survive, thrive, and stay out of the hive. And this very much is on the first order of that, the survival part of it. A lot of people don't think this is credible, but I'm beginning to think this is very probable, what we're looking at here. Also, people can support my channel by clicking the links below. If we have a nuclear war with any country, and especially today, China, you can bet that the power grid is going to go down. The first thing they'll do is hit us with an EMP. And Dr. Prequel was on a commission that told us that 9 out of 10 people would be dead within a year if this took place. And then if you've watched the previous interview I did with him, I've made the proposition that that was optimistic, and made my case for why. And you'll see that video. I think the number is going to be far worse. So you're really going to have to get ready. I do have prepwithgreg.com, where you can get a special for a 4-week food supply. That's food that's 2,000 calories per meal for 4 weeks, 3 meals per day, $100 off. It's like right now the price is $197. It may go up because food prices are skyrocketing right now with all the things going on in the world. So it's a good deal right now. It's going to be a good deal relative all along, but right now you can get it especially good deal. Prepwithgreg.com, 2,000 calories per day. You can it's dehydrated, so you can carry it around in these little buckets they give you, which is just an awesome way if you have to bug out. So check that out. And also, you really mostly need to grow your own garden. I know Dr. Pry is now living, you can see, he's got a log cabin, a historic log cabin, I might add. So he is taking it to heart and has moved out and is taking care of himself in prepping. And you need to consider that too. I would grow a garden. You really need to learn how to do that. Go to True Leaf Market. You can support my channel by going to True Leaf Market and buying seeds. They got all manner of garden seeds. You can still get them there. A lot of sources you can't get them at now. And they even tell you how to grow your plants, how to grow them, how to raise them. It's an excellent deal. You can get supplies. If you live in a city, you can grow microgreens in your living room. You'd be surprised how much food you can grow just on a shelf. That stuff grows really fast. I got videos telling you how to grow those microgreens because I grow them in my living room. You can grow them in your kitchen counter. For Pete's sake, people grow them in a closet. You do need air circulation, though, some kind of fan sub just to keep the mold down. But these things are doable. You'll be surprised what you can do to survive in any situation if you plan accordingly. But what Dr. Pry is throwing out here to you is that this whole prospect of nuclear war is quite feasible, that it is something that the planners plan on in the countries that are our adversaries. Now, you may think that China's not an adversary, but you need to wake up and clear your eyes out, because they have indeed, as he pointed out, been waging an economic war against us for decades now, and they've been winning it. Now we're pulling it back and changing that scenario. This actually puts us, in my opinion, in a very dangerous thing today, because China, any power, their primary objective is to remain in power. Any political party, any leader, their primary objective is to stay in power, more than even preserving their own people. If you don't believe that, look through history and you'll find out how many people Mao Zedong killed of his very own people. They love them so much. So yeah, it's more about their power. So don't make any mistakes about that. Look at their heavy hand they have today in their state. So when they want to stay in power, and they right now, because we are pulling back manufacturing, which we should do, because we don't need them being the world's manufacturer, especially if we get in a war with them. But when they're losing manufacturing, they're losing manufacturing jobs right now in droves. A lot of companies are pulling out of China. They still have the capacity, still have the factories. You need to remember that they still have the factories. They've been fighting floods all spring and summer. China has been flooded to the hilt. So their food production has dropped dramatically. They have a lot of people to feed there. So you got hungry people, unemployed, damaged infrastructure. There's a lot of discontent. There was already discontent building in China over malfeasance, misappropriation of funds, building all those ghost cities. So China was already having structural problems before all these things hit. And then there was that bug that went around too, and a lot of shutdowns associated with that. So there's a lot of discontent among the citizens. I'm going to say this: there's good people, good citizens in China. There's good people anywhere in the world. Well, a lot of these good people may be trying to find a way to get out from under this. China's had a history of about every 400 years overthrowing whatever dynasty ruled them, and this has usually been coincident with grand solar minerals, by the way. So, which we seem to be coming into one right now. That may be part of what's driving all this weather. But in any event, at some point, the Chinese people might decide to get rid of the CCP. And the CCP knows this. Their tactic used by those in power is what we call wag the dog. When it gets really hot at home, they try to distract their people by declaring a war or something on the outside. And there's no bigger war than going, they would claim success if we're going to Taiwan. Look at this great thing we're doing, to their internal people, the people of Taiwan, which are also Chinese. I just did a video on the two Chinas, Peter. To them, that's just the opposite. If China was so great, if the People's Republic of China, let me rephrase it, there's a Republic of China, Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China in mainland China today. And a lot of people just don't understand that if the People's Republic of China was such a great and wonderful proposition, as a lot of our students here in this country seem to think, then the people of Taiwan should just be clamoring to join it. They should be just happy. And the people of Hong Kong, no, they're willing to fight to the death. They are committed. They don't know part of that. So That should be a lesson. There's reasons for that. And if you aren't even the Han Chinese are suffering greatly under their leadership. If you're not Han, you're suffering even more. Ask the Uyghurs, ask the Inner Mongolians, ask the Falun Gong, who happen to be Han Chinese for the most part, as I understand it. So there's a lot of, ask Tibet. I mean, hey, we used to have a movement called Free Tibet. I'd say free Tibet, free the Uyghurs, free Inner Mongolia, but and leave Taiwan alone. Maybe Taiwan can return to being the government of China that they were originally, because they were the government of mainland China until the revolution that was the People's Republic of China, led by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, pushed them out. So a lot of people today believe in this narrative that Taiwan is a renegade province of China. Oh no, they are a separate government. They were China and still are a China. So all that said, Peter, I think maybe I took it too far off course here. But
now, let me take a little further off course. Although it really isn't. We've been talking about nuclear conflict in the classical sense, all right? But a dimension that we really need to talk about is the asymmetric vulnerability that the United States has special forces operations within our borders. And I've given this more thought recently than I have in the past because of the violence in our streets from Black Lives Matters and Antifa. I'm absolutely convinced, knowing how foreign intelligence officers think about these things, that they are certainly paying attention to the flaccid response of the U.S. government to this violence within its streets. And they probably can hardly believe their eyes, because totalitarian and authoritarian states don't tolerate much political dissent, and they never tolerate violence. The peaceful protesters in the Tiananmen Square, for example, in China, the United Kingdom had a secret estimate that at least 10,000 of them were executed by the Chinese government, and some estimates go as high as 30,000. North Korea, according to Human Rights Watch, has got 120,000 people in concentration camps for political disloyalty, and 400,000 have been executed for suspected disloyalty to the regime. You get executed or thrown in prison in North Korea not for being assuredly disloyal, but just for being suspected of disloyalty. And so
for the viewer, we just had a dropout of our call here, and we're reestablishing. So if this seems a bit discontinuous, that's because it is. So this is our second session that we're coming back here with. And Dr. Pry was making an excellent point, so I'll let him return to the points he was making. Dr. Pry?
Sure. Up to this point, we'd been talking about nuclear conflicts in the classical sense, where the nation states know they're at war with each other. But I'm increasingly concerned about what are called gray zone wars because of the inability of the U.S. government to cope with the terrorism in our streets from Black Lives Matters and Antifa. This is an object lesson. It's 100 days and counting where we've had violence in major American cities. And this is the second precedent, the second example that has been given to totalitarian and authoritarian enemies around the world that the U.S. government seems to be pretty impotent to deal with this kind of violence. The 1960s were the first example they had, where the anti-war movement, black radicalism, the countercultural movement, and the terrorist organizations that spun off from that resulted in years of violence within America's cities that the United States couldn't cope with. There were 4,000 bombings during those years. Now we've got another revolution going on in the country. We haven't had 4,000 bombings yet, but the revolution is young, and it seems to be heading that way. So this is giving aid and comfort to our potential adversaries, because I'm sure that they're saying, look at what we could get away with in a gray zone war within the homeland of the United States, and not just Russia and China, but this would be especially attractive to countries like Iran and North Korea, who don't have our robust conventional military. and who are looking for asymmetric ways to deal with America. You know, imagine if you had, now we know that during the Cold War, the Soviet Union had this idea in mind about penetrating special forces into our homeland just before World War III. I was actually in charge when I was on the professional staff of the House Armed Services Committee, and we had hearings on this where we had two high-ranking Soviet defectors, GRU Colonel, GRU is the Russian military intelligence. We had a GRU Colonel, Colonel Stanislav Lunev, who testified. And then he wrote a book, by the way, that is still around, published in 1998, called Through the Eyes of the Enemy. Through the Eyes of the Enemy. He talked about GRU Special Forces operations that were planned, and he was personally responsible for helping plan these operations within the United States. And the other one was KGB Colonel Oleg Gordievsky. And both of them testified to the House Armed Services Committee about how the Soviet Union, before World War III broke out, had prepositioned special forces weapons, high explosives, and even small numbers of nuclear suitcase bombs. These are small atomic demolition munitions that were disguised as a suitcase, a briefcase, even in one case as a golf bag. The idea was that you would take these, throw it in the trunk of a car, park the car someplace near the White House, and just before you launch your first strike, you know, blow up the White House, vaporize the Pentagon, and atomic demolition munitions would be used elsewhere in the country as well to take out critical military bases and command and control nodes, so that we would not be able to launch a retaliatory strike. Wouldn't even know who was attacking us at the time because of these nuclear blasts. And then the first strike would come in that we were talking about before to take out our ICBMs and bombers and our ballistic missile submarines. Well, based on the fact that the U.S. government is unable to control violence even from Antifa and Black Lives Matters for more than 100 days now, think of the aid and comfort and the encouragement that must give to North Korea and Iran. In fact, I don't think they had to wait for that. I'm sure they know we're a free and open society. All of these enemies of America, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, I suspect they've already got prepositioned materials, just like the USSR did during the Cold War. By the way, I want to stress that they planned on this long before the war ever happened. It wasn't some last-minute thing. What Gordievsky and Stanislav Lunev told us, they would spend years putting military caches into the United States and NATO country. We were supposed to have 100 of these caches. Not all of them, only 1 or 2% of them would have a nuclear suitcase bomb in them. But most of them would have small arms, high explosives, communications equipment for special forces. And we actually got 3 lats and longs on some of these caches. And we know it's true what they were telling us because we recovered high explosives, communications equipment, and small arms from 3 caches, one located in Germany, one located in Austria, and another one in Belgium. These are NATO countries, and this is an act of war to preposition these materials on their country. That's what the Soviet Union was doing during the Cold War. The Clinton administration actually went looking for the suitcase nukes, you know, but we couldn't find them because we only had exact information on the location of those 3 caches. And on the information that we had, we actually found them right where they were supposed to be. Now, if the Soviet Union was doing that during the Cold War, you can be sure Russia's doing it today, China's doing it. I'm sure North Korea and Iran probably also do it too. As a free and open society, they can stockpile special weapons in our society long before they need them. And given the kind of violence that revolutionary groups can get away with in this country, I'm sure they could do a better job today because they have plans like information warfare. So if you're thinking like the North Korean general staff or the Iranian general staff or the Chinese or the Russians, think about this scenario. You know, you want to, at some point, you're going to invade NATO Europe, or you're going to invade South Korea, or you're going to invade Taiwan, or you're going to attack Israel. and you know when you're going to do that. So before you do that, maybe you spend 100 days of violence in the United States trying to cripple our military capabilities under the guise of domestic terrorism by Black Lives Matters or Antifa. You can do all kinds of things that would be injurious to us, because in our homeland, our military bases are designed for a 1950s Ozzie and Harriet America where Antifa and Spetsnaz didn't exist, were unthinkable to that generation. There are 50,000 surface-to-air, shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles available, 50,000 of them that have been circulated out to the third world. They're in the possession of terrorist groups. They can be purchased on the black market. These SAMs can outrange. They can be operated by one guy. They're shoulder-fired SAMs. To just use one example of the kind of thing that Antifa or Black Lives Matters could credibly get their hands on. They can range far beyond a military base. So you could take out tankers. You could take out B-52 bombers. You wouldn't have to take out many tankers or bombers. We only have 30 of them that are nuclear capable now. If you took out a few, it would significantly cripple our capabilities. What else? We were talking about ballistic missile submarines before. We have 14 Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. The Russians and Chinese, they birthed their submarines in tunnels, in nuclear hardened submarine pens. We don't do that. We birth them right out in the open. There are sniper rifles that are available, super sniper rifles that all of these bad guys have, that can reach out 3 kilometers with an armor-piercing bullet. So for a $5 armor-piercing bullet, you could take out $1 billion ballistic missile submarine. That's the kind of thing you could do, and blame it on Black Lives Matters or blame it on Antifa. The ICBMs, even the ICBMs are at risk in this kind of a scenario. A shoulder-fired SAM during the boost phase, you could take out an ICBM as it's launching with a hunting rifle or with a shoulder-fired.
Oh yeah.
SAM, and it wouldn't take many guys deployed among those ICBM fields.
If you puncture a fuel tank or a solid rocket case, and we have both liquid fueled and solid rocket motor boosters, like the Minuteman's a solid rocket booster. You compromise its integrity as a pressure vessel. It's got so much pressure in it will rupture somewhere in the boost phase if you put a hole in it. This is something I know because I do rocket system safety. I know that you can defeat something like that. So you don't want somebody putting a round in something like that, but they'll probably want to have the capability. Yeah, a 50 caliber, is a typical size of a sniper rifle. Oh my God. When I was in the Army, I saw where you could shoot down a wall with a 50 caliber weapon. Of course, you have to fire a few rounds in there, but that's a very formidable round, very formidable. But even a 30-06 would do a lot of damage. Oh, by the way, I'd like to point out something. It is, whether anybody wants to buy into this or not, I have been told that there was a shipment that came from China of auto sears for AR-15s that would turn them fully automatic that got intercepted. And the rumor is it was intended to go to certain dissident groups here in the country. Now, I don't know I'm not speaking to the veracity of this claim, but I've been told this by some pretty good sources. And these sources also claim that had a lot to do with why the Chinese consulate in Houston was shut down. So this may be in play already. The kind of things you're talking about
exactly
might possibly already be in play.
Well, I've got an anecdote for you that is true for sure. I've read about that too, and I think it's very plausible. But when I was on the EMP Commission, and we were, it came to our attention that there was an incident that happened. This was during the 2001-2008 timeframe. That an operational Scud missile, okay, it didn't have a live warhead on it, but the missile itself was operational, and it had a practice warhead on it. But a private collector had wanted to have a operational Scud missile for his museum, and he was importing it. And because it wasn't disguised, we actually have a photograph of this thing. The operational it was an operational, I think it was a Scud C, and it was actually on its launcher, sitting on a dock in San Francisco. A watchful inspector said, "Wait a minute, where is this thing going? Well, here's this big ballistic missile. All right, it's like 40 feet tall, sitting on an operational launcher, and the inspector is standing in front of this thing. He looks like a little tiny toy in front of this enormous missile, and this thing almost got past the inspectors to arrive at this person's museum. Now, that's what a private collector was able to do, and we know we do have private collectors in this country who have operational MiG aircraft and things of that sort, who have them
yes,
because they collect it. Now, you can't do that in Russia or China or North Korea or Iran, but that's the kind of thing you can do in this country because we're a free and open society. So just imagine if you are a nation state and you're trying to smuggle special weapons into the United States to raise havoc during a gray zone war before the big one goes up. I mean, that's just an example of what the kind of thing you can get away with. You can almost send by mail, as it were, or FedEx, an operational Scud missile without even disguising it. And it almost gets past the inspectors. All right. So clearly they could get all kinds of things through us.
Oh, and, Peter, what are you worried about? Our borders are so tightly controlled, we couldn't possibly sneak anything across our borders.
Right. Right. Even the drug czars these days have submarines that are smuggling tons of cocaine into the United States and other kinds of.
There's places you can drive semi trucks across the border for peace.
Sure. The chaos in our country by Antifa and Black Lives Matters and the impotence of our government apparently to deal with these terrorists coincides with a technological revolution in special forces weapons that's going on right now in Russia and China and North Korea and Iran. And there's a long list of them, but to give a few examples, China has got an unmanned drone that has a range of 15,000 miles, and it can fly under radar. It could actually be launched from Beijing and to go to Chicago and come back again, and carry the equivalent of Hellfire missiles and jamming, and it's also got a radio frequency warhead on it that can do jamming of radars. It could actually be used to take down an electric grid. So you could fly a drone, an unmanned drone from China, attack our electric grid, maybe take out some bombers, and then fly the thing back to Beijing. Now for that you don't even have to penetrate our homeland, but that's an example of there are other drones that special forces could use. For example, the Chinese have got a mini helicopter that can be operated by one man. It's unmanned. It's a drone helicopter, and it can fire. It can bait missiles that are capable of taking out a tank. I could picture, a number of these things being used to swarm our ballistic missile submarines or to attack our bombers on their bases. All of these countries have got super sniper rifles that can reach out more than 3 kilometers with armor-piercing weapons and perform the kinds of attacks on our submarine. If you punch one hole in the pressure hull of a billion-dollar submarine, you've got to fix that before that sub goes to sea. At minimum, you're going to delay the use of this submarine. If you put more than one hole in it, you've got a good chance of possibly disabling the thing for a protracted period of time. Taking out our electric grid is an easy thing to do. We know from that if you can take out 9 transformer substations, according to a previously classified study by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, you could start a chain of cascading events that would black out the whole electric grid. So you don't even need to do a nuclear EMP attack to do that. The Iranians have demonstrated amazing drone capabilities. Last year in 2019, they attacked pipelines in Saudi Arabia, hundreds of kilometers away from Iran. They sent drones into Saudi Arabia, traveled hundreds of kilometers, made very precise strikes. They had to be within 1 meter of the target to launch these missiles from drones to take out the pipelines, and then also attacked and destroyed an oil refinery, major oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, major act of war that they were able to do. Those kinds of drones, those kinds of drones could also be used to take out electric grids. You could put a radio frequency weapon on an Iranian drone of that type to follow our program it to follow our power lines and take out transformer substations and that sort of thing. One of my favorite of these special forces weapons, I'd like to have one of these things. I'm sure we probably can't get it, but it's the Russian RPO-M. This is a rifle grenade launcher. Okay, it's basically a grenade launcher weapon that fires a thermobaric warhead. This is a miniature fuel air explosive warhead, so that one lone gunman would have the firepower equivalent to 155 millimeter howitzer artillery shell. That's a huge amount of firepower. You'd be able to basically blow up, a whole brick house. Just one guy blow up a major, a stone bank. A building like that, a huge structure like that, is the kind of thing you can take out with a 155 millimeter artillery shell. But in this case, you could have hundreds of people running around armed with this one kind of weapon, racing hob against our military forces, against the Pentagon, against the White House, against critical command and control nodes. Can you imagine something like that going on for 100 days? If the special forces equivalent of Black Lives Matter masquerading as Black Lives Matters and Antifa on steroids, claiming that they're a domestic terrorist group, they could basically win World War III before World War III happens, before we even know we're in World War III. The technical term for this in military art is this is a gray zone war. It's a war you don't even know you're at war with the adversary yet. He's using his special forces to basically set you up for defeat before the big war happens. And
we don't know that we're not already in this. This could already be beginning.
We don't know. We know that the Black Lives Matters is a Marxist, Leninist, far left, that they have the same ideology, that the kind of ideology, they say the same things about the United States, North Korea, Russia, and China say about the United States, and that Iran says about the United States. Their ideology fits in perfectly with the view that our adversaries have. We are so deeply penetrated in our universities, unfortunately.
Yeah, and also a lot of people don't realize is the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, well, when he was told about the report that you mentioned that said that all you had to take out was 9 critical substations, take down a power grid, his response was, I've already targeted 20. And they have sleeper cells here in the United States right now.
They do.
And they're just waiting for the word to do something. And, it hasn't got, they're not going to activate them until it's a full blown war or right at the precipice of us. But, when they activate them, that means the war is on. And who else has them? Does North Korea have sleeper cells? China could easily have all kind of sleeper cells in this country. And some people claim that their security forces for some of the solar power stations and other things they have here are indeed PLA, People's Liberation Army. And I've even seen video which seems to report PLA troops in Canada. I don't know what the veracity of that is, but it's these are things that could easily disturb people.
I'm sure that China, Russia, and Iran all have sleeper cells. I'm not quite so sure about North Korea, but I have a theory, can't prove it, but all of these countries, they're the new evil axis. Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, they all work together. The Iranian nuclear and missile program is supported by North Korea, China, and Russia. Similarly, North Korea made the advances it has made in ballistic missiles and nuclear because the Chinese and the Russians are helping them. And North Korea and Iran are scientific and strategic partners by treaty. There are North Korean scientists helping the Iranians with both their nuclear and missile programs. So they work together very closely. I suspect that all of those Iranian sleeper cells in the United States are also at the disposal of North Korea, as well as China and Russia. I think that the famous attack on the San Jose transformer substation. I wouldn't be surprised. That happened in the midst of our most, that was April 16th, 2013. I think I might not have the day right, but I know it was in April of 2013 because we were in the middle of one of the most serious nuclear crises with North Korea at that time. A couple of months earlier, they had conducted, I think it was their third illegal nuclear detonation. And that plunged the United States and North Korea into during the Obama administration into another huge confrontation that looked like it might be going toward a military confrontation. And it was in the middle of all that we had this mysterious attack by parties still unknown on the San Jose transformer substation. I suspect that might have been carried out by Iranians on behalf of North Korea. And part of the reason for that is one of the most important targets in that part of the grid was Silicon Valley. The Iranians had never forgotten the Stuxnet worm, and they had promised that they were going to take revenge for the Stuxnet worm that the Obama administration unwisely told the New York Times was jointly developed by Silicon Valley and Israel, to basically go after Iran. And the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps threatened, well, we're going to take revenge for that someday. And so Iran and North Korea had a joint interest, basically, in going after that particular transformer substation. Had they actually taken it, but the attack wasn't intended to be successful. I think it was the SEALs who later examined that operation on behalf of the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, said that they deliberately didn't take out, they could have done it, but it was a training exercise, the way the SEALs do. And that when you're doing an exercise, you never want to go all the way, because that way it exposes your vulnerability to the enemy, and then they may repair that vulnerability. They just wanted to push it up to the edge to see how much they could get away with. And then, that was the judgment of the SEALs. And I think that is correct, that was basically an exercise.
It would have been 100% success because we don't know to this day who did it. We've not been able to trace them.
And had they taken that part of the grid out, in addition to taking out Silicon Valley, it would have affected San Francisco, which is still an important node for operations against North Korea if it came to a war. So that was but that's just an example of how a sleeper cell probably already was involved in an exercise against the United States. And there are an estimated hundreds of at least the Islamist terrorist cells in the United States, and of course Iran is the leading sponsor of international terrorism in the world. So we've got serious problems right here in the homeland in terms of our security. We could end up losing World War III before we even know we're in World War III through one of these gray zone wars. And as you noted earlier, who knows? Maybe this violence we're experiencing right now is not entirely a domestic factor. Maybe it's being supported by our adversaries. Certainly, I think the ideology that they have comes direct from our adversaries. The Soviet Union during the Cold War went to great efforts to penetrate our universities, and to so that American youth could be brainwashed and misled and turned against the country that they belong to.
Well, yeah, given all that, it just so happens that, you can think of our defenses as an immune system. No creature survives without an immune system and will get ate up by the bugs in the environment. Our borders, our defenses, they all consist of our immune system. Our borders are wide open. We've allowed all kind of people inside this country, which is kind of like you're ingesting the pathogens to start with. And on top of it, with all the recent strife in America, our immune system is way down. We're way distracted. We're operating under capacity due to shutdowns from the bug that's been running around. So we are actually particularly vulnerable right now. If it's not started, it could start pretty soon. The elections are coming up. People are expecting more strife around the elections. And it's rumored that even if Trump wins by a landslide election, I've heard that it said that the Democrats, the DNC, which some of us have been joking, call it the CCP DNC. The DNC is definitely talking. I've heard internal discussions that they're going to try to get the states that even had Trump win Electoral College to try to flip it to Democrat. And yeah, there's all kind of craziness being talked out there. Essentially, I'm hearing language of a coup. Now, I don't know if they could actually pull that off. I think that's a long shot. But what I actually expect is that there could be, no matter who wins the election, there could be very significant strife around Inauguration Day even. And so anytime between now and inauguration, I think we're very vulnerable. And when you got a country like China that is at risk domestically for their power base, they may be tempted to wag the dog. They still have the manufacturing capacity at the moment, but that might go away soon. They might decide to use it while they got it. So I think we're in a very high risk zone right now.
Oh, absolutely, I agree, and I'm very fearful of losing World War III without us ever even having been aware that we were in a war. You know, when we speak of coups, and I don't think it's highly unlikely, we have to understand that there's two different kinds of coup d'etats. You know, one of them is the South American banana republic variety, where the military uses armed force. That's the classic coup that most people think about.
Right.
But a different kind of coup called it's also called an Orange Revolution. All right, where a foreign government interferes and supports totalitarian or gives unfair advantages to another political party that puts power and the party interests above patriotism, and doesn't mind that it's being helped into power by an adversary. Barack Obama attempted this in Israel against Netanyahu when he was supporting a lot of money, and political advisors from the Obama administration penetrated Israel and were supporting Netanyahu's political opponents within Israel. They failed, but it was an attempted coup d'etat, peaceful coup d'etat, using these techniques and tactics against Prime Minister Netanyahu. Our intelligence agencies have done this sort of thing in Eastern Europe, in the aftermath of the Cold War, to try to achieve positive outcomes among a number of the Eastern European states. It's gone back and forth in Ukraine, where the Russian intelligence agencies initially got a pro-Russian guy in charge of Ukraine. Now there's a pro-U.S. government in there, but those things aren't happening entirely by accident. The clandestine forces of both sides have been interfering with free and fair elections in Eastern Europe. All right.
Right.
And so this is now you have a Democrat Party in this country, which is basically a totalitarian movement. It's not the Democratic Party of our fathers and grandfathers that cares about America first. They don't put America first. They put the ideological objectives of the Democratic Party first, and those ideological objectives are socialism and anti-Americanism. A real belief that we are an evil, racist, homophobic, structurally irredeemable kind of a country that needs a revolution. A peaceful revolution. They point it, but their brown shirts are out in the streets right now. Even if they don't have a foreign connection, they are clearly doing their violence with the aid and comfort of the Democrat Party and at the behest of the Democrat Party political leaders. So it's a totalitarian movement very much in the mold of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia or the brown shirt Nazism of Nazi Germany in 1933. And you know, with this mail-in voting thing, you know, clearly we're being set up, you know, to achieve a peaceful revolution by stuffing ballot boxes and through other tactics. You know, they're all lawyered up to be able to challenge the legitimacy of a Trump victory and to try to reverse that outcome by foul means, not by fair means, but by foul means. It's called lawfare. There's even a word for it in counterintelligence operations. It's law. It's called law. You know, lawfare, and in effect, that's what the Democrat Party and its activists are doing. They're employing the techniques that we used to use in foreign intelligence, you know, with the CIA and in our intelligence services against foreign governments. But these same tactics and techniques appear to be being employed domestically now in the United States. And this isn't the first time. After all, there wasn't a failed coup attempt, clearly, an Orange Revolution type coup attempt, not a violent one, that used lawfare against the Trump administration in 2016. And in fact, all through President Trump's first term, it's been lawfare against him endlessly, trying to get him impeached, using phony charges against him, you know, using the reasonable person standard. I don't think any reasonable person could say that what the Democrats have been doing is reasonable and rational against the president or really in defense of the Constitution. All of this has been in the service of their ideology, their extremist ideology, to achieve political power for that one party. And I really do think, I mean, it's said every time there's an election, but I really do think this is it for the United States. You know, if this election is lost, the Democrats will finally have struck upon a way of conducting orange revolutions domestically within the United States, so that the Republicans will never be able to come back and have political power. And this will be the realization of the worst fears of the founding fathers, because they always thought that the biggest threat to our constitutional republic was domestic. You know, that it would come from exactly such a thing as this. Yes, that's why they hobbled the government with
Right.
checks and balances. You know, because the government
compromised.
right was perceived as the greatest threat to the liberty of the people. And you know, maybe I've used the quote before on your show, but I'll do it again. You know, Abraham Lincoln wasn't one of the founding fathers, but he lived when he was early in his political career. He wasn't that far removed from them, and he certainly was reflecting their mindset when he said that no transatlantic giant, you know, would ever, in a contest of 1,000 years, would ever be able to put a footprint upon the Alleghenies or take a drink of water from the Ohio. The authors of our destruction, my friends, if it happens, will be ourselves. And he was referring to this threat of our own government, us going the way of Greece and Rome, you know, which is what tends to happen to republics. They become imperial systems. They become totalitarian or authoritarian systems eventually, you know, because it's hard to be a free system. It's hard to be a democracy. It's hard to respect people who disagree with you and to listen to what they have to say. That's hard to do. It's easy to turn them off and to say they're evil and they don't deserve a hearing and they should be maybe even put in prison and killed if they disagree with you. That's the easy way. That's the way.
Of freedom of speech. Oh, we shouldn't listen to this side. Don't listen to them. Don't let them talk because we don't agree with them. They're evil. They're this. They're that. And, you know, it's a dehumanization process that adversaries always use in warfare, is dehumanize your enemy as much as you can. And they've been playing that to the hilt. You know, it's interesting that they accuse the Trump administration of being Nazis, and they claim to be Antifa. If you want to see the biggest Nazi nation that's ever existed on earth, consider what is Nazism? It's National Socialism. What is the biggest nationalistic, socialistic state in the world today?
China.
If you and look, they have people in prison. Xinjiang, how do you pronounce it? The province where the Uyghurs live. It is considered an open-air prison. There is maybe 3 million Uyghurs in concentration camps today. They are forcibly sterilizing Uyghurs. Look what they're, it's said that they're harvesting organs from them and from the Falun Gong in Inner Mongolia, where most Mongolians live inside of China's in Inner Mongolia. They're not allowed to teach Mongolian in the schools anymore. They have to teach everything in Mandarin Chinese. So
let's not forget the persecution of Christians in China too.
Bingo. It's if you don't believe in the state religion, which is no religion, the CCP is God, then
Right.
You're in trouble in China. That's what you have to believe, that the state is God and the state owns everything. The state is everything. That's the purpose of their society. And without the state, you're nobody. You are the state. You have no freedoms. You exist to serve the state. And the state doesn't really care anything about you at all. They only care about maintaining the power of those at top. So it's an extremely corrupt, extremely evil system that cares nothing about anyone in reality except the person at top. People just don't get that. And so how can you be against Nazism and you're given a free pass to and perhaps serving the interest of the most powerful potential Nazi nation that ever existed? Wow. And we said never again when it happened, when the Holocaust happened to the Jews in World War II. Yet look today, we are absolutely in total violation of the never again because it's happening right now in mass. And the same country has been belligerent with all its neighbors, just as Germany was in World War II. They are on the precipice of conquest. They're already pushing at everyone all around them. But there's the hope. They're also stupidly pressing against one of their chief allies in Russia, because they're already making claims to Russia's primary Pacific naval base, Vladivostok. They're actually saying, oh, that's ours, and we need to reclaim Vladivostok. So Putin, of course, takes note of that. And Putin also realizes his population is diminishing. He's got a huge territory to govern. And Siberia is vulnerable, perhaps one day, to Chinese invasion, even if it's just eventually by people streaming over the border. Eventually, there's enough Chinese there, they would just say, hey, we're Chinese. Russia is an empire, a nation that is high at risk. And their single biggest threat, I mean, right now, we've got them pushed in the corner, so they're responding to us. But in the long term, and Putin knows us full, as everyone in Russia knows us, in the long term, their biggest threat isn't us at all. Because we're never going to go over and invade Russia, per se, and take it over. Their biggest threat, the one country that could do it, the only nation that could do it, and the nation that absolutely will do it if they're not checked, is China. China is Russia's biggest threat. So the hope is, and I have, is that we could get smart and renegotiate terms with Russia, just like Nixon did with China. Nixon flipped China and put them in our pocket as an adversary against Russia to help contain the Soviet Union back in the days. We should flip that today and use Russia in an alliance against China. That may be our best hope to contain China.
I agree, and that was actually General Flynn's plan, and it was President Trump's plan too. And because it would be a way of splitting this new axis of evil, the combination of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and international terrorism is the most formidable array of adversaries that we've ever faced in our history. But the most important part of that combination, since nuclear weapons are the most important and most advanced technology, is Russia. They are the most advanced, they have the most weapons. And if we could split the China-Russia axis and bring Russia into being its true strategic partner, it could buy us peace, for generations. Because China takes a long view of these things. And I think if they realized they had lost that alliance with Russia, they would start competing with Russia again to become our friend, and they would be trying to do the same thing against us. And so we would be looking at perhaps generations of diplomacy where we could do this balancing act and preserve peace that way. Unfortunately, perhaps one of the greatest crimes, perhaps the greatest crime against the American people and our security from the Democrat Party has been the Russia hoax. Because it has neutralized President Trump and his best advisor, who had thought this through. I mean, this was actually the theme of one of the book that General Flynn wrote about splitting the Russia-China alliance and trying to bring Russia back into our orbit. And it kind of President Trump hasn't been able to move in that direction because of these constant false charges that he's Putin's puppet, and and that the Russians he only became president because the Russians conspired to do it. And these same Democrats who during the Cold War never saw a threat from the Soviet Union and always thought that the threat was really from hawkish Republicans who were fueling the arms race, the nuclear arms race, But suddenly now the only threat they can see is Russia, So it's a complete reversal for them, and this has really been a great crime against the security of America and against all Americans, that this pathway toward peace that could be achieved through diplomacy has been blocked. It's the best pathway there. It possibly could still work, but usually, we were in a much, Bill Clinton had the opportunity to do it too, but he didn't. He was being advised by, I can't remember that guy's name. He was basically a communist himself. And what the Clinton administration ended up doing was get all of our foreign aid to Russia that was supposed to prove to the Russians that capitalism works and America was their friend. That ended up going to the nomenclatura in Russia and banked in Swiss bank accounts. And as a consequence, it empowered the Russian mafia so that free enterprise wasn't able to work in Russia. And unfortunately, the Russian people got the impression that what free enterprise is really about is turning their government over to the Russian mafia and over to the nomenclatura. And it was an even a worse situation than the socialism they had under the Soviet Union. So because of Bill Clinton blowing it, and then no president after him making an effort to try it, and then President Trump's hands being tied. And unfortunately now, because of nobody wants to become an ally with somebody who's weak, right? And, in order for that to work now, the United States has got to do a lot more to rebuild its military capabilities. When Putin, I agree with you that Putin is going to say, well, my real long-term adversary is China. But if he looks at the United States and says, well, how long can I count on a President Trump being in power? When is a Joe Biden going to come in power? And what is the United States going to do with its nuclear capabilities and its conventional forces too? Can I count on the United States as being a real strategic partner against China? Or am I going to basically be left alone because the United States isn't willing to carry its share of the national security load?
He's probably looking at the latter right there, being left alone, and that's how Putin has probably responded. Putin is a very shrewd man. He's very smart, very shrewd. As any dictator, his primary objective is to remain in control, and we're seeing that. And of course, he's off to want to poison his adversaries, but that's what you get out of dictators. That said, Russia was ready to eat out of our hands when the Soviet Union fell apart. Yeah. And instead of, and they thought we were going to come in there and give them a hand up. Instead, we sent in the vultures and they picked their bones clean. Putin took power to defend Russia against our vultures that were picking them clean. So we really blew that badly then, but I still think there might be room to repair it, but that room is vanishing quickly. And I think, again, as you said, everything hinges on this election. I think the future of Western society may indeed hinge on this election, maybe in the future of humanity. If we have a large-scale nuclear conflict, we could be set back to the Stone Age, literally, if it escalates fully. So I don't know. If we go back to the Stone Age, Peter, we don't come back because when we started this industrial revolution, there was iron ore. There's plenty of resources just on the surface of the ground, basically, for picking up copper. You can stick a stick in the ground in Pennsylvania and oil would come up. Now you go offshore and sink a well that the surface of it is a couple of miles, maybe 3 miles deep, and then you got to drill another 2 or 3 miles. So the resources are not as easy to come by today, and it takes a vast, complex civilization to tap those resources. If you crack that egg, you don't put it back together again. That's why I worry about the grid loss. But what I'm seeing, Peter, is a credible threat and a window of opportunity in which China may particularly want to hit us in the next few months. Within the window between now and possibly even a little bit after inauguration, that they're really vulnerable right now. They may want to wag the dog, and so I could see this possibly going down. I think it's I think we're in a high risk period of time right now, very high risk. And hey, if the election goes the other way, Russia might decide to hit. Putin actually claimed that if Hillary got elected, he would have performed the first strike on the United States. Am I right or wrong?
I agree with you. I think you're right. I think we're in a very high risk situation right now. And I'm particularly concerned about that very window that you described. In fact, I wrote a book about this called The Long Sunday.
Yeah.
This tradition that we have an election and then months later we have an inauguration, is a particularly vulnerable period for us. And it's an artifact of our 19th century constitutional republic. This idea, the way we have this transition in power, goes back to the horse and buggy days. It didn't seem to matter much when we decided on having this long window between the election and then the inauguration. Things, it was a 3 mile an hour world then. Ships had to sail. It took weeks to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. And people didn't worry that there were any kind of national security implications about such a long delay and a period of confusion in the transfer of power. But today, in the nuclear missile age, in the EMP age, in the cyber warfare age, when a war can be prosecuted at the speed of light, this is a real potential Achilles heel, when you're going through a transition in government. And this is likely to be the worst transition we've ever had because, as we've been saying, the Democrats are gearing up for a long period of lawfare. They're going to want to challenge a Trump victory if President Trump is victorious. There's going to be a period of violence. The opposing sides are so polarized, that the government that Trump is wanting, Trump also, he failed to drain the swamp. So he's actually sitting on a Barack Obama's government. We never really saw a Trump administration. We saw President Trump in the White House, but we've never seen a true Trump administration. We've seen
all his time defending himself from impeachment and everything, kept him hamstrung the entire time.
We have a handful of high-ranking officials in charge of the various departments and agencies, but the normal process that would happen, where we've replaced thousands of these officials with people who support the administration, and then those officials hire people who support the president's policies, that never happened.
Oh.
That's one of the reasons the intelligence community is still saying that China has 200 weapons, for example.
And you know what? It's true in the military too.
Community.
It's true in the military. It's true in the military too. Obama eliminated vast numbers of field grade officers in the military, and so here's the risk, as I said. they're really pushing for these mail-in votes, and not just mail-in votes for people that aren't at home or away on travel, which is attended. They really want people that are at home who could walk down the street and cast a vote to do a mail-in vote now, so they're safe from the bug that's going around. They don't want people to congregate. So they're encouraging everyone to mail in as many votes as possible. The post office, look, I shipped worms until April. The post office got so bogged down with just the extra orders of stuff going through it that they couldn't do reliable deliveries. My worms were dying. I couldn't get them delivered in time. I've had several weeks sometimes for them just to get delivered. It was insane. And this was before the current postmaster and everybody's complaining about. No, it was already wrecked. And so suddenly we're going to put ballots through this system. We're going to choke it like it's never been choked before, and everything is going to be okay. Now, see, their plan is to have an election that's unresolved by Inauguration Day. Now, I think that's their objective, because if you can't resolve the election by Inauguration Day, as I understand it, Pelosi becomes president for some time. And I wouldn't put it past General Mark Milley to go in and take Trump out of the White House and put Pelosi in. In fact, I would expect him to do that. I don't trust that man. I want to be honest. He is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is the most powerful man in the military. And I don't trust him no further than I could throw a pack of elephants.
I don't trust him or the whole JCS. Most of them are Obama generals. Obama generals. And again, President Trump never really changed the Pentagon, and even his own handpicked guy, Mark Esper, who's basically, a former lobbyist for Lockheed Martin, right? But what a traitor he is. Here's a man who was picked by the President of the United States to be the Secretary of Defense, but he's so weak that when he escorted President Trump, he and there was another member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Maybe it was Milley. But remember when there was the terrorist action in Lafayette Park and the church was set on fire, and President Trump decided to have a media event to defy Black Lives Matters, and he, along with his direct Secretary of Homeland Security and Esper, the Secretary of Defense, and there was somebody from the JCS on that. They walked with President Trump across Lafayette Park. A perfectly reasonable thing to do. A show to the American people that the White House is still in charge, that we're not afraid of these terrorists. Well, the Joint Chiefs, headed up by Milley, put so much pressure and criticism on Esper that he apologized. The Secretary of Defense apologized for participating in that event with the president. And so
that's backwards. That's backwards.
Another JCS person who was there from the Pentagon who also apologized and distanced themselves from
that's
that.
uncalled for, because the chain of command is the civilians are supposed to be in charge of the military.
Exactly. I mean,
that was uncalled for from General Milley.
Esper should have been fired right there, and Milley should have been asked for his resignation right there. And they're also bucking the president on the idea that that troops could be used to defend our cities, against the violence from Black Lives Matters and Antifa. And yet,
if you go back to the days of the war between the states, if you look at the historical pictures, what was posted all around the White House and the Capitol? U.S. troops. They were there. And
Eisenhower brought in the troops, to integrate the schools in the South. He brought in the troops to do that. Kennedy did it, and the media cheered these things. Nothing wrong there when the military was called in on these emergencies. A Republican president, conservative Republican president did it. Eisenhower, Kennedy did it. Every one of these officers, when they take their role and they talk about defending the Constitution, it's to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic.
Yes.
Domestic, so they have no business. What they are saying is that there is unconstitutional, really. Basically what Milley wants to do is reinterpret the Constitution to say, well, the Pentagon can't do anything to defend the United States against domestic enemies. We can only be called upon to fight forever wars in places like Syria and Afghanistan. If you want to send our troops to fight overseas, call us then. But if it comes to combating Antifa, Black Lives Matters, or terrorist groups in our city streets that are burning down our city streets and murdering Americans in our cities, oh, well, that's not our job. Don't call on us then. What? Didn't we fight an American Civil War, based on the idea that there were, enemies domestic that had to be dealt with, as well as these other cases? The constitutional law and the precedence is overwhelming that they have an obligation to follow the president on this. But in effect, they've successfully defied the president, because President Trump hasn't talked about that since then, because he's gotten pushback. Frankly, he has too much respect for these guys in uniform. He doesn't understand that even the generals are political, and there are good generals and there are bad generals. And President Trump, I hope after 4 years, maybe if pray God he gets reelected, maybe he'll finally do what he promised to do in terms of draining the swamp, including in the Pentagon. The Pentagon is not supportive of President Trump's policies.
No, they're not. No, they're not. But I tell you what, for the individual troop, they need to bear in mind, it's illegal to follow an illegal order. So if you're a troop and you get ordered to do something that is against the Constitution, you swore an oath to protect the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic. And that includes your own command staff. That includes the people that are in charge of you. Just a word of the wise, every federal officer, every law enforcement officer, everyone takes that oath. And it's not an oath that you swear for the duration of whatever your service. There's no time limit when you make that oath. You didn't say, I swear to protect the Constitution for 2 years, for 4 years, for a period of enlistment, for what? No, it's an oath to protect the Constitution. I swore that oath. I'm sure you've sworn that oath.
I did. I did.
And you are held. That's your obligation. That's your honor. You swore that oath. And we may have to come to the day that we have to realize that.
And in the after, I hope and pray that the military and the Pentagon remembers their pushback against President Trump, all right, about not getting involved in domestic matters if a Biden administration comes into power. Because somehow I suspect if President Obama was in power, and if there were conservatives out there rioting in the streets and doing what Black Lives Matter is doing, man, you would have seen the military in there parachuting into these cities to put down the uprising by people defending, for example, their Second Amendment rights, faster than I can blink. And people should remember, I hope, if there is a Biden victory, that they're defending the Constitution. So that means that if some governor, like the governor we have here in the state of Virginia, tells you, well, we've got to get control of those guns, and so we're going to confiscate everybody's guns and take the guns away. That's against the Constitution. There's the Second Amendment, and and I'm very seriously concerned about it going that far if we have a Biden victory. Where they will call upon the military to basically, and it will then obey because the military right now is full of Obama generals, that are sympathetic to the ideological views that are dominating the Democrat Party, which has clearly got these totalitarian. It has become a totalitarian movement. I almost said had totalitarian tendencies. No, it's not just totalitarian tendencies. They're really a full-blown totalitarian movement right now.
Oh yeah.
I'm really
saying all freedoms, erase culture, cancel culture, cancel freedoms. Tucker Carlson asked the ultimate question. I think he said, "How can the party that hates America lead America?"
Right.
Well, I'll tell you where they lead it: down the drain, into totalitarianism. They will give us the DNC will give us to the CCP.
That's right.
On a platter.
They're going to want to redistribute our wealth, take away people's guns, brainwash our children. That's what the 1619 Project is all about. This thing, critical race theory and the 1619 Project and all of this crap about, the United States is systemically racist and systemically oppressive of the working class and homophobic and oppressive of the sexes might as well have been written by North Korea. I mean, this is right out of the North Korean, Communist China, Russia playbook.
Yeah, if you want to see a society that is exactly that way, go to communist China today. Look at what they're doing. You know, if you're a black person in communist China, you're nobody. They got treated real badly, especially when the bug was going around. And a lot of, you know, there were a lot of African nations that were getting lured in by the economic sweet sugar, the temptations that China's been offering. But a lot of their people went home and said, hey, we were getting badly discriminated against, and they were being attacked and drove out of their housing, and they went back home and said, hey, we got to reconsider. And some of the African countries actually flipped on that basis. They realized what China really was and what it was doing to them. So China is doing this right now. They are extending this Belt and Roads Initiative. They're going out to all these other countries, and they're saying, hey, okay, we will bring to you great economic prosperity. We're going to bring jobs. We're going to bring a trade route through your country. I call it an invasion route, actually. And so let's go in and we will loan you money to build all this stuff. By the way, they also don't use local people, workforces. They use Chinese labor, Chinese companies to build all these facilities in other countries. These are facilities that would easily be used for an invasion. They're typically still controlled by China, and these countries are suddenly in debt for having this facility built, debt they cannot possibly pay back. So China gets even more retribution out of the country for the debt they didn't. So for China, it's a win-win, because the China don't really cost them anything to build these things, yet they get it all. They want to, and the country has that signed an alliance with China. They will vote with China in the UN. You know, you just talked earlier in this record about China losing in The Hague against the trial that the previous president of the Philippines put against them for what they were doing to Philippine islands, taking Philippine islands. And the Hague said, no, this is way outside of your jurisdiction of the law of the sea. And China just ignored it. See, China will ignore the UN when it's in their favor, but when they got all the votes on their side, they know we won't ignore it. So they'll use it against us as a weapon, and they're trying to line these votes up right now. But I'm hoping that people are beginning to see the color of China more clearly, and this is going to start backfiring. I don't know where we're going to be in our country at that time, though. And again, it depends on the selection. We may have already lost World War III in a sense through that. I don't know. You know, what is World War III? I think I'm going to title this video "Losing World War III." Are we losing World War III,
Right.
Peter?
At the end of the day, World War III is about ideology.
Bingo.
Freedom versus tyranny. And I think Candace Owens put it very well. She was on Tucker recently and basically said, you know, what the Democrat Party wants to do is turn government into God, so that government will.
That's what China does. That's what I said earlier. Yeah,
yes,
that's China's
government play the role in people's lives that God has been, and the Democrat Party postures itself as such. It must enrage you as a scientist to hear the Democrat Party constantly, sometimes describing itself as the party of science, allegedly because they believe in climate change and Republicans don't, but science is supposed to be on their side. Allegedly because they believe in the gay rights agenda, you know, where science is on their side, but Republicans reject it. You know, so allegedly for irrational reasons. And science and government are the new God. That's what they want people to believe. And
it's not real science. It's their finger on the scale science produced by agencies that have a vested interest in maintaining the storyboard they're trying to maintain. And that storyboard all leads to tyranny, global tyranny. So really it's globalism, but it's not just global trade that some people think. Some people think globalism, oh, we're just going to trade and cooperate around the world. And, you know, so we're all before this great reset that the World Economic Forum is pushing. But in reality, this globalism is tyranny. And the intention was to have China sit at the top of it. And something else these island nations need to realize is as China's buying into them, once China gets it and gets you, you're going to be the new Uyghurs. You're going to be the new Tibetans. You're going to be the Falun Gong. You are going to be nobody. They're going to come in and take you and take your country. They're going to take African countries. And, you know, the Europeans were horrible to the Native Americans, but that pales compared to what China will do when they come into your country. They love no one. They don't even love their own people. So you don't want to go down that road. You want to stop this train. China has seduced the world through two things. One is the idea that there's going to be this great marketplace for you to trade with. I'll say three things. The other, cheap labor. And the third, the one that I see so many of these other countries with, is their Belts and Road Invasion Road initiative that they're selling all these countries on, which is supposedly developing these countries, but these countries are want to be owned by China as a result of it. And once China owns you, you're in trouble. China produces more engineers per year than America produces lawyers. China has vast manufacturing capability. They have 1.4 billion people, and if they really unleash the reproductive capacity of that nation again, they could quickly, vastly fill up continents in this world. So watch out. We're looking at Planet China. It's not a pretty picture. It's not at all pretty. A lot of people in this country have been seduced by this and told how terrible we are, how good they are. It's the opposite. Hey, our founding fathers weren't perfect. No human being's perfect, but they crafted documents that talked about the rights of every man and about the equality of every man. It didn't say a man that looked like this or looked like that, that believed this or believed that. It was every man, and you can extend that to every woman, humanity in general. That is huge. It's revolutionary. It took us 200 years to actually start to figure out what it really meant, because you had to come from a deficit in freedoms and rights and understanding of liberty. But we've worked our way up that tree of liberty, but now we're suddenly just about to give it all away. Said no, we don't need liberty. We don't need freedom. One state system's good enough, which always in a one state system is going to be corrupt to the hilt by definition, because there's no checks and balances. So, Peter, we're in a real, the entire planet is at risk. A lot of people don't realize just how grave the peril is. And our youth have been seduced through their terrible education system into believing all these narratives. Yeah, we've got problems. We have issues, but we can work these out. We can do it amongst ourselves, and we don't have to do it through violence. But we are going to have to, we need to confront ourselves, come to terms and peace within this country, and develop real understanding and love for freedom. We also need to go out and do what we need to do to defend ourselves from these powers on the outside. One thing we need to quit doing is trading with China. I say we need to cut them off completely, because every dollar we spend on there builds our military. That's how they built all that up, was with all the cheap junk we bought from them initially. Now they're wanting to go into high-tech stuff. And the Trump administration has put brakes on that with the availability of chips, by cutting out Huawei. These are brilliant moves, by the way, and it's a good thing for us that this is happening. Other countries are taking note. I don't know. We may fall down. We may trip on this road, though, this November. I hope that we maintain our path to containing the evil empire that exists there today. I would like to see the people of China wake up and say no more CCP. In fact, I think it'd be awesome if suddenly they embrace the Republic of China, which is now totally, since 1988, democratic-style republic with elected representatives. I think they would provide a good model for the entire mainland China to follow. They are a separate nation. They're not a renegade province, as the CCP has convinced people today. They never were under the power of the CCP. They were the government of China until they got ran out of China. So, and that's what I just did a video making that case. So, what do you see as a path forward? Give me your words on what you see.
Well, I agree with everything you said. But my biggest concern immediately is about the choice the American people are going to make in this upcoming election. I hope the Chinese will choose the path of freedom, but I hope even more that the American people will choose the path of freedom.
Amen.
I hope even more that those Americans, and it's just hard for me to believe, the American that I grew up in has come to the point where it seems like a third to a half of our population has embraced totalitarianism and has embraced this false, negative view of America. Although it doesn't surprise me, because movement conservatives, cultural conservatives, have been ignored for decades, and we have been warning for decades that the left has been taking over all of our major institutions, including our educational institutions. And so our youth have been brainwashed, into this point. And I just hope it's not too late for these people to come to their senses and realize, and for us too, those of us who reject that, to understand that if the other side takes power, the violence that we see is not going to end. It's going to be continued and accentuated. The kind of activism that's being encouraged by the Democrat Party for people to engage in new thinking and impose this ideology. You see these things on Tucker Carlson about Black Lives Matters, intimidating old people. Just imagine what these people will do when they have power. They'll come to your homes. They'll come to your suburbs. They'll find you on your farms. All right. It will be like the Cultural Revolution in China, to force people to abandon their evil ways and embrace the new thinking. Even the governor of California, we were talking about climate change a moment ago. Tucker had that great tape from Gavin Newsom, governor of California, on the issue of climate change, where Gavin Newsom talks about how he's an open-minded person and he's tolerant of other views. But when it comes to climate change, he has no patience for those who are deniers of climate change deniers. That's a phrase that, by the way, is associated and derived from Holocaust deniers. In other words, Gavin Newsom in his mind puts those who deny climate change in the same category as these evil, uninformed people who deny that the Jewish Holocaust in World War II ever happened. And that's a clear totalitarian technique. It's basically saying that you are not legitimate to even think that way. How dare you defy that AOC, that climate change is happening, that poses a mortal threat to us? This is the kind of party we face. So
our nation's top scientists that monitoring our climate, Doctors John Christie and Dr. I'm getting brain lock right now. They're here in Huntsville, Alabama, and I'm going to tell you what, these guys will tell you that there's no proof of climate change. Dr. Roy Spencer is the name I was trying to think of. I met these guys, and they are at the forefront of measuring this satellite data, and they don't buy this.
Can I get up from my seat for a moment? I want to get a book and show you. Is that okay?
Sure.
I'll be right back.
So, for the watchers here, we are at risk for our freedoms, and what I want to tell you is that you can support freedom. I've started a new organization. We have board members in the states of Washington, in the states of New York, here in Alabama, in Arizona, in Wisconsin so far, and we're expanding this organization. It's the Freedom Restoration Foundation. And join the Freedom Restoration Foundation. I'm telling you about my Freedom Restoration Foundation. I'm starting a new organization, and we've got board members already in various states in the union. And I'm still using an old email address. I haven't set up my URL yet. I do have it reserved to Freedom Restoration Foundation. But for right now, temporarily, you can email me at HAL5space. This is no Space Society email that I don't use for anything else now, HAL5SPACE at AOL.com, and put freedom in the subject line to join our organization.
This is a great book. It looks backwards in the screen, but the title is Inconvenient Facts, The Science That Al Gore Doesn't Want You to Know, by Gregory Wrightstone. And you could read this book in a couple of hours. It's written in layman's language so that anybody can understand it, but it really does an excellent job in deconstructing the claims of the climate changers. He's an excellent scientist who explains the climate science in terms that anybody can understand, and points out that proves basically in this short book that the worst claims of the climate changers, that we face a climate catastrophe in 12 years and all the rest of it, that is nonsense and is untrue. So for people, you don't have to take our word for it. You just pick this book up, and it's so well argued. No reasonable person, can read the book and believe in the extravagant claims that the Democrats are making about climate change being the new Holocaust that we face.
Amen.
Inconvenient facts.
Here's another great book that people might want to pick up, written by somebody I've had a few conversations with.
Thank you. Right.
Of course, this is written by Dr. Peter Pry himself, Blackout Wars, about a threat to EMP. This book also has the great advantage of giving you sample letters and things you can write and do and how you can approach getting your grid hardened yourself. And we do have an organization that Dr. Pry and I both participate in, regular telecons with Secure the Grid. So we're actively engaged in this right now. So we're working to try to secure the future for this country and keep it moving in terms of keeping our grid hardened and things like that. But we're also out here trying to spread awareness about these threats that we're looking at from foreign and domestic enemies. So that's what we're doing here. So, this is how you can help us out. You got any closing thoughts on this, Peter?
You had asked me before about the way forward, and the way forward is to vote for President Trump, to vote into office a Republican Senate, a Republican House. That's going to give us the best chance to save our country by modernizing our nuclear deterrent, giving President Trump a second chance to drain the swamp so that we finally get a Trump administration in place, not just a President Trump, but a Trump administration that supports the president and will move forward his policies. The way forward is for all your listeners and to all patriotic Americans to do what the founders expected of them, to become educated, to be activists. Don't be passive. You've got to fight back. You've got to fight for the future of your country. Write your congressmen, write your senators, become a pain in the ass.
There you go.
Don't
vote by mail. Don't vote by mail because they can take that signed envelope and steam it open and slide another vote in there. If you vote by mail, you're not even voting. Go in and cast your vote.
Right. For all of these issues, we need, modernized nuclear deterrent. We need space-based missile defenses. That could change the whole nuclear balance around. That's another topic for another show. We need to protect our electric grid and life-sustaining critical infrastructures. And President Trump is trying to do that. So tell your congressman, start a movement in your own state. The book Blackout Wars has got an executive order in it. If you just sign, that's 2 pages long, that 2-page executive order, if you could get the governor in your state to sign that executive order and fill in the name of his state, it would begin the process of protecting your own state. The whole country doesn't have to be protected. It should be. But if Washington fails to protect the whole country, at least you can make your own state secure. And let me say this. If President Trump loses and the worst happens and we end up with a Biden administration, still don't give up hope. You may have fighting at the level of Washington, for another 4 years, that may be over. But, you can still be and should be always your own first defense. There's a lot of things you can do at home to be prepared for the worst. Stockpile food, stockpile water, have a medicine kit and know how to use it. Think about where you live. If societal chaos comes because of the chaos that the Democrat Party will bring with it into the White House, or because we are suddenly attacked by our adversaries during this extremely dangerous time, there's no reason why you have to go down into darkness. You can protect yourself. You can protect your family. You can talk to your friends and get your community prepared. The strongest part of this country and the basis for freedom that the founders always believed in was always you, the grassroots. You are America, not the men in Washington, not the men in the state government. You are America. So as Winston Churchill said, never, 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 never give up. Okay? As long as you are alive and your family is safe and you can live according to the way you want to live, America is still alive in that little cell of America that represents you and your family and your community. And so that's my last word of wisdom there, so that all of our hopes should not be pinned even on our president. We need to do everything we can to win this political struggle, but even if it is lost and the Democrats come to power, there is still hope as long as you are there and thinking and capable of providing for your own security.
All right. Well, I think that's a positive note. We can do it. And I do try to bring resources to help people do that. I do videos showing people how to garden without having to go to the store to buy things, how to produce everything you need yourself to successfully grow gardens. You can order seeds, but you need to order seeds that you can save the seeds from. Order heirloom seeds. That's why I say go to my link to True Leaf Market below, and you can go to prepwithgreg.com. Not only get the great deal with $100 off 4 weeks supply of food, but if you click on the Patriot Supply logo within that link, you can go in and get all kind of prepping supplies, water filtration, air filtration, medical kits, all these things that you're going to need so that you can survive, thrive, and stay out of the hive. And that's what I try to bring to you. And here you can see the clear example of what's in front of us, what could happen. I hope and pray that we get through this period peaceably, that all these things do not transpire, but it is a risk. It's a clear and present danger that World War III may be upon us, and we might not even know it. And of course, we could lose. And in a World War III, if it goes kinetic, you must know that victory is most likely to go to he who strikes first. That's the real problem. That's the real risk. And believe you me, our adversaries know that. And I did do a video about China talking about launch on warning instead of, they're probably even beyond that. They're probably absolutely full tilt over on first strike. They have to be to think that they might win. With the aggressive posture they're taking in the world, they're being very aggressive. That kind of posture, I would totally suspect that may be exactly where they're at, and it might come to pass. And so many people think it won't happen because, we will take them and wipe them out. Don't bank on that. Don't bank on that at all. That's what this video is telling you. Do not bank on that. It could happen. And I even did a video, Peter, where I talked about how many troops they could actually move on just a fraction of their cargo ships. It's mind-boggling. So yeah, they could do a full-scale invasion if they so chose of any country, and they could sneak it in. You think you got cargo coming in, it's actually troops. So it's sobering to think about. Anyway, if you don't mind, stay on for a moment. Do you have any other closing words?
Just to reinforce what you said about preparedness, and when you think about it, we use the word prepper to describe those preparedness now, and survivalists. Sometimes in the mainstream, in the left-stream liberal media, it's used in a negative sense. But what you are doing, Greg, is encouraging people to live the way the great generation and all generations before them lived. This so-called being preppers or survivalists is really bringing back the principles of rugged individualism and self-sufficiency that made America great and free in the first place.
It was the basic lifestyle of my dad and his generation. That's how they lived.
Our constitutional republic, the founders had exactly that kind of person in mind, a person who was not only capable of sustaining themselves, but consider it a matter of pride that they would be able to support themselves and their family, and they didn't have to take a government handout, and they were fiercely proud of that independence from government and suspicious of any effort by government to try to make them dependent on government, because they knew that compromises your freedom, that compromises your freedom. And that's what the Democrats are trying to do. That's the issue, that's the great issue that's at stake in this election. What kind of America are we going to be in the future? Are we going to follow the path of socialism, where people belong to government? People belong to government, and government is God? Or are we going to, or is freedom going to be vested in the people, and government works for us, and we see government for what it really is, which is the most fallible of our institutions, the least worthy of our institutions.
Bingo. And our founding fathers knew that.
Which is why we need to be prepared to survive even without government, a situation that we could face in just a few months if people like Biden and Kamala Harris and the left are elevated to power because I don't even think they're competent to run the government. And we could well be plunged into chaos and anarchy.
Well, Biden isn't even competent to make a coherent sentence.
Right.
You know, Kamala Harris would be president like immediately if Pelosi isn't put in first because of the mail-in vote or whatever other ambiguity they can create. So yeah, we have a lot of danger in front of us, a lot of risk. If you think 2020 was a bad year, 2021 could potentially be far worse, or it could be better, just depending on how we were able to turn this thing around. But yeah, so Peter, I really appreciate you coming on the channel. I do want you to stay on for just a moment. To the listeners, again, you can support my channel by clicking the links below. Go to greg.com, watch my videos on all these things about how to survive, and go out to the box stores and buy, bulk stuff. But, get ready to start gardening. It may be winter time right now, and you may say, Greg, it's too early to buy seeds. No, buy them right now, because you don't know if the grid's going to be operable, if you'll be able to order anything next spring. And then again, too, you might consider, just think about how there was runs on toilet paper and stuff like that. For those few companies that are still selling seeds, there's going to be a run on them if the grid is still up come next spring. Get it now. Buy enough for yourself. Buy enough for your neighbors, so your neighbors won't eat you too when everything goes down. I did a video, Peter, where I should everybody go out and buy tools, buy for redundancy, because your tools are going to break. But buy enough for your neighbors too. I really believe in this approach now, because your neighbors don't know it yet, but they're going to have to become gardeners, or you're going to have to share crop their yards or something like that. So I really appreciate you coming on the channel. I appreciate you being the patriot you are. All the help. Some people don't realize this. You do this out of the goodness of your heart because you care about this country. You could just retire and live simple. I mean, I'm an engineer. I make a decent salary. I could have never went into prepping. I could have not gardened. It's cheap to buy junk out of the store. I could have lived the easy life, took the easy route. But I believe we're coming in grave times. That promoted me to start a worm farm, to start gardening. And I believe I have the responsibility. With great knowledge comes great responsibility. And that told me that I had the responsibility to try to inform my fellow citizen of what's going on. So I took on the extra burden of starting some YouTube channels. And that's a pretty busy life. A lot of people don't understand just how much time that takes and all the effort it takes to do all these things. But I do it because I think it's important. I know you do what you do because you think it's important. So this should be the testament that we believe what we're saying, folks, that you do need to prep. You need to get ready and help your fellow man as much as you can. With that, to the viewers, I say thank you for watching.